Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's so good to have you join us here for the second Animal Behavior and Welfare Conference in Africa. Today, the 6th of April, 2023. We are so delighted to have all of you with us. At the last count this morning, we had 333 people that had signed up for the conference. So it's a real pleasure, and we are so delighted to have you all join us. Thank you for joining us from different parts of the world. We literally did have people sign up from every continent, going as far as even having people join us from the Middle East and from Europe, from literally everywhere. So thank you all for joining us, and we are so glad to have you. I'll probably just quickly introduce Dogalove Human Support Initiative, the sponsors for this event or the organizers of the event, and then we'll now hand over to our keynote speaker. So Dogalove Human Support Initiative is the organization. It's a nonprofit registered in Nigeria, and Dogalove has been for a number of years now, both working to pioneer human-animal interactions in Nigeria, which is a One Health project, and one of the ways also that animal behavior makes a tremendous impact in human lives. So that's the core of our work. We are enriching human lives through animals. That's our theme. That's our vision in essence, and that's what we work to achieve. So we host 2 conferences every year: the Animal Behavior and Welfare Conference in Africa. That's usually in the earlier parts of the year. So this is the 2023 edition of that. And then later in the year, we would also have a Human-Animal Interactions Conference in Africa, where we also have people joining us from different parts of the world, but mostly an African audience. So thank you all so much for being here. And thank you, we are delighted to have you. And at this point, I will be reading the bio for our keynote speaker to invite her up for her speech. So our keynote speaker for today is someone who obtained her first and second degrees from Federal University of Agriculture in Abeokuta, Nigeria. She obtained her PhD from Newcastle University, Newcastle upon Tyne. She's a specialist in animal behavior and welfare, and she's a senior lecturer in the Department of Animal Physiology in FUNAB, that's the university I mentioned earlier. She belongs to several professional bodies with an international and at international and local levels, such as UFAO, Universities Federation for Animal Welfare, the International Society for Applied Ethology, Animal Welfare Research Network, the World's Poultry Science Association, the Nigerian branch, and a host of others. She is a member of Applied Animal Behavior Science Journal's Editorial Advisory Board, and she's the secretary for ISA Africa and West Asia region. She's the coordinator for the Animal Welfare Group Nigeria, and she's the first animal welfare officer in Africa certified by Cloverleaf Animal Welfare Systems in the US. In 2021, she was the main organizer for the first cohort of animal welfare certification course in Nigeria, in collaboration with Cloverleaf and the Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta. She has 45 journal articles and 29 referred conference proceedings to her credit. Please make welcome our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Iyasiri.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Let me start by first expressing my heartfelt and sincere gratitude to you for according me the rare opportunity to speak at this all-important conference. In an entire career spanning over a decade of consistent commitment to issues surrounding animal behavior and welfare, this is the first time I will have the privilege to give a keynote address at such a forum of global significance. This is not only a truly cherished privilege, but also one that does me unquantifiable honor. So I would like to share my screen and continue my thought. Please allow me. The host, please allow me share my screen.
Oh, okay. Yes, please. Okay. Allow automatically. Okay, I thought you were co-host all along. Okay, so you're being promoted to co-host. I think you can now. Please let me know.
Okay.
Yes, fantastic.
Yeah, I believe you can see the screen.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So I would like to know your opinion. What do you associate these animals with? Kindly drop your comments in the chat box and we'll talk about it later. I know we have audience from Africa, from Tanzania, from UK, from Canada, from Australia, from different parts of the world. What do you associate these animals with from whichever region that you are joining this meeting? Animal behavior and welfare are by no means novel concepts. We are simply in an era which are necessarily compelled to pay more attention to animals and to study them with greater scientific depth and enthusiasm. Our ancestors had a keen intuitive understanding of animal behavior and treated their animals with kindness. Their compassion for their animals was such that they even graciously permitted their animals to spend their nights in their mud homes. They gave their animals pet names, and they were in keen awareness of whatever ailment may afflict them. In fact, they also had the repertoire of herbal remedies they used to treat the animals when they fell ill. And this brings me to the topic. My keynote address will be based on the stigmatized animal, victim of erroneous social and spiritual narratives. I am quite aware that Africans make up the majority of this audience. The greatest challenge for everyone all over the world is how to persuade other people about the importance of animal welfare. Interestingly, our forerunners in the field of animal behavior and welfare were faced with the same challenge. I once had the privilege of having an interview with Emeritus Professor Donald Broom, acknowledged to be the first professor of animal welfare. When I questioned him about his experience with animal behavior at the beginning of his career, I was shocked by the response he provided. Even though he encountered fierce hostility to the idea of animal welfare as a science, he remained undeterred from his lifelong perfectly established welfare as an intellectually and academically acceptable science. And today, he has successfully built up both a discipline and a personal career in this so-called non-scientific area. He deserves our sincere commendation for a dogged fight based on an unflinching conviction. Being of African descent, I am in a good position to thoroughly explore how our society has shaped the idea of how people and animals should go along. Our culture, including its arsenals of proverbs, taboos, and religion, greatly affect how we approach animals. Phobias have been unintentionally embedded in our DNA by our culture. The ultimate and unfortunate consequence of this is the pervasive ill treatment of our animals. In pertinent regard, I would like to share a rather poignant experience that led me to my phobia for cats. Societal influence led me to believe that cats were the embodiment of evil. In the Yoruba movie industry, popularly known as the Nollywood, cats were fearfully referred to as the Ologbo Iyagba, which literally means the cat of the old witch. And truly then, you see, it's only the old women that kept cats. In my first year at the university, I had an experience that would leave me quaking at the knees. I had unintentionally left my window open while away at lectures. When I returned, I found to my utmost dismay My landlady's cat and her newborn kitten dozing peacefully on my bed. Oh, what a scene. My first and immediate impulse was to kill them. Yet I refrained from doing so because of an earlier experience as an 8-year-old child. I had witnessed a cat being slaughtered in a cruel and inhuman manner. The cat was bound by its leg, placed in a sack, and raised and repeatedly struck on the concrete floor. I will always remember the cat's hapless house. The recollection of this gory incident all but assured a reconsideration of my current situation and what I plan to do. In the event, I quickly contacted the cat owners to come and retrieve the cats from my room. Looking back with experience, I believe that August visit of the cats and her kittens in my room might just have been my divine inauguration into my future career. My father, the late engineer Moses Ayinde Shobala, had, however, unintentionally planted the seed of my career in animal behavior and welfare, as he kept goats, chickens, dogs, and other animals in his backyard. And from my interaction with other people who work in animal behavior and welfare, I've come to realize that they had an encounter with animals right from childhood. We once had a shiny brown-skinned goat that produced several generations. After some time, everyone in my house began to call her Mama Goat. She was friendly and lovely to play with. While pursuing my master's degree program, my mentor, Professor Olusegun Ayedele, asked me a specific question. And I want you to ask yourself this same question. What will your area of concentration be? Why do you want to study animal behavior and welfare? When he asked me this question, I could not respond because I had never thought about it. He ended up watering the seed of my career when he educated me on the fact that animal behavior and welfare was a brand new niche and no one in Nigeria had yet expressed any desire for expertise in it. On that day in 2007, the groundwork of my professional life was laid. Then how did I proceed after that? I started networking with other academics across the world who worked in animal behavior and welfare while advancing my career and honing my interest by setting aside time each day to observe animals for motivation. That is one of my secrets. I get inspiration watching animals on a daily basis. You can try it out. In fact, I have spent so much time watching chickens that I truly believe I cannot comprehend the language with which they communicate with me. That is why I was nicknamed the mother hen. And last year, I published my first book, Go to the Hen. Spare me a moment to return to the cat story because I know you want to know how it ended. I took off the bed sheets from my bed for rigorous laundry. After this occurrence, I spent 3 days unable to sleep in my room due to my dislike for cats. Little did I know that I would one day become a passionate advocate for all animals, including cats. 7 months ago, I shared this cat story on LinkedIn and it generated tremendous interest. That was when I became aware that the attribution of all evils to cats was a global phenomenon rather than being localized to Nigeria and to the rest of Africa. My vowed goal is to totally eliminate this misguided and absolutely untrue notion. I have given serious consideration to how to achieve this objective, and I discovered an ally in Caro. Caro has dedicated her entire life to helping cats. She has a page called All I Am is Cats. I got in touch with her to speak to the Animal Welfare Group, Nigeria, and shift the narratives about cats in the country. and she happily obliged. She said to me, now I know why we met. Now more than ever before, have the opportunity to inform the world. The heartbeat of every cat that has ever been a companion around the world is the heartbeat of Nigeria. Now is the time to update the stories that are told about the wonderful creatures of our world. Now is the time to radically alter the prevailing narratives of these creatures. Now is the time to gain a deeper understanding of our animals. Now is the time to look for ways to enhance their welfare. Now is the time for our society, neighborhood, and nation to adopt a more animal-friendly stance. Now is the time for our governments to pass the enabling legislations that will protect and preserve these animals. It is my eager anticipation that after this meeting, we can start looking forward to an African generation with a stronger appreciation for animals. My hope is that this forum will catalyze and galvanize a generation that aspires for a better life, a life worth living for our animals, in the process, further preserving our Mother Earth. Let's work together to challenge and change these harmful narratives. Once again, I say thank you for the immense privilege of addressing you.
Thank you so much for that presentation and speech, Dr. Yasiri. And thank you for the call to action that came with it. I especially love how you spoke from the heart and how you did accurately put out the, let me call it the African perspective. Sorry, who is? Okay, so thank you so much. I especially love how you did put out the African perspective. I would want to just quickly read a few comments that came in during the chat that I think I love and help to speak about what you talked about in a bit. So someone said, taboo and religion has been a major challenge in animal approach in Nigeria, especially in cats, which, like you said, really does sum up where we came from. But I'm happy and glad that we have a growing population of people like yourself, who are really speaking up for animals and helping to create a better world for animals and a better welfare situation for animals in Nigeria, in Africa as well. My mentor, Dr. Elizabeth Omrod, also said the cat represents, that is to the question you said the cat represents species that are companion animals. For me, the others are wild species, should be allowed to remain in their natural habitat. I have concerns about them being maintained in captivity. So thank you all so much for these responses. And at this point, I would love to probably just quickly, Dr. Yasiri, ask you two questions that came in from the pre-conference questions. So you can probably also just shed some light on them before we move to the first major speaker. So just briefly, I would want you to give your thoughts to these two questions. I'll just put them both together right now. So one says, the practical approach to alleviate heat stress in animals, especially in poultry. So someone is asking about practical approach to alleviate heat stress in poultry. And another, the person says, in Africa, research has always been a challenge, mostly due to financial challenges or lack of sponsorship. What is the way forward for research in Africa? So can you just quickly just share your opinion on this, and then we'll move to the first speaker for the day.
Yeah, thank you so much. The first question talks about how to alleviate heat stress. Yeah, there are different ways that have been tried. We have the nutritional aspect of it. There are several experiments that have been conducted and have used things like maybe honey, coconut water. I'm talking from research that have been done in Nigeria. And this has helped in alleviating the heat stress in poultry birds. There are other things that can be done to alleviate stress. It could be like infrastructural, the facilities that are available in the pen, maybe having fans or a ventilation system that makes the environment reduce the temperature of the environment for the animals. Although that may be expensive for us in developing countries because you need power to generate to put these things on every day. But let's look into the resources that we have. For instance, we have some animals that are readily adapted to our environmental condition. What have we done about them? About them by improving them and making them to be the major source of our animals? Because they are readily adapted to our environment, they may not really have much issues compared to exotic species, bringing exotic species into the tropical environment. And the second question about getting grants for research in Africa, it's not only in Africa, I think it's a general thing all over the world, especially when it comes to research on animal welfare. However, I would like to use this opportunity to appreciate some bodies that are ready, to sponsor some research in whatever area. I would like to appreciate the Universities Federation for Animal Welfare for what they do. So what they do is, it's very simple. If you are interested in animal behavior and welfare, and you can identify a person in your institution, this person can be recognized by the U4 under the U4 link scheme. And once you have a U4 link person in your university, it gives opportunity for every member of that institution to be able to get access to their research grants, and their research grants of different categories. You have the small scale and you have the bigger scale research grants. And they also have grants for students, which they publicize every year. Two of my students have won that research grant, and this helped them for their master's degree program. It only means that you need a U4 link person in your university or your institution. So if you don't have that yet, you can start working on that. And also becoming members of maybe international societies that are doing research, that are doing things related to animal behavior and welfare can help. I know of the International Society for Applied Ethology and other societies, ASAB and things like that. They help with some grants once you are a member of that society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so very much for those responses. And thank you very much for your presentation as well. You really have done an excellent job of kickstarting the meeting. At this point, we'll just quickly switch to the first major speaker for the event for today. And I'd love to read his bio. So he is someone who has a BSc, who received his BSc Zoology from University College Cork, his PhD in zoology as well from University College Dublin, and carried out postdoctoral research at the University of Zurich. After serving as a faculty member of the University of Nottingham, Queen Mary University of London, and the University of Roehampton, he joined City University of Hong Kong in 2020. He is a member of the Association for the Study of Animal Behavior, ASAB, as well as serving on ASAB's education and EDIA committees. He's also a member of the International Society for Applied Ethology, ISAE, and serves on ISA's EDIA committee. His research group is focused on understanding how evolution, ecology, and domestication affect animal behavior and welfare. The current main species for his research are goats, cattle, water buffalo, chickens, and kangaroos. He also actively promotes higher ethical research standards. Here to speak on the topic animal cognition and changes to standards of welfare, please make welcome Dr. Alan McElligott.
Thank you very much, Sunday. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Before I share my screen, I just want to say that well done for organizing this meeting. I had the pleasure of meeting Sunday last October, November in Gaborone in Botswana for the African Network for Animal Welfare, and it was my first time ever attending that meeting. And I was hugely impressed with the amount of animal welfare work that is already going on in Africa. So it was amazing and really inspiring. So I got to meet Sunday there, and that's how we've stayed in contact since then, and he's invited me to speak today. And I would also like to say it's a great honor to speak to this group today. And also wanted to commend Sunday for the organization, because I know from experience, organizing these meetings is hard work. A lot of time and effort goes into it. So well done for putting this grouping together and having us in one place today. So hello from Hong Kong, everyone. I will share my screen and tell you about what I'm talking about today. Let me go on full screen view. Can you see my screen okay, Sunday?
Yes, can.
Actually, I forgot one thing. Let me do that again, because I forgot to share sound as I went to share a screen, and I think I played a couple of movies. So yeah, it shouldn't be any different, but now the sound will go through. So I'm talking to you today for about 40 minutes. I've got 50 minutes in total. Hopefully I won't run over time, but I'm talking to you about the interface between animal cognition and changes to the standards of animal welfare, and how knowledge of animal behavior and animal cognition can result in changes to animal welfare standards. I've been working on animal welfare for years. I now work in a vet school. I have a background in zoology. I've also worked in a psychology department, a zoological institute. That's been good because it really developed my own knowledge. So animal cognition is all about how animals perceive information and their environment, and potentially how they act in relation to that information and their environment. You may know as well that a key feature of animal welfare and animal welfare standards are our thoughts and regulations and sort of rules regarding animal sentience. And of course, animal sentience is basically the conscious of it's debated in terms of philosophical debates around exactly what animal sentience is, but we will go with a very sort of simplified version, and that is animals being aware of when they're in positive or negative states. So if animals are aware of being in positive or negative states, that means they have the potential to suffer if they're actually suffering or if they're experiencing bad lives. So that's where animal cognition comes into it, because for many of our typical farm animals, of course, things have advanced a lot in the last 15, 20, 30 years, but there is still a lot to be done in relation to our livestock animals that are used in farming and farm animal production and used in huge numbers across the world. So mainly what I'm going to be talking to you about today are some of our goat research that we've been doing I was checking earlier today, and I've been doing goat research for about 16 years. But the sort of concepts that I'm presenting to you today do apply to other livestock species as well. So a little bit about me and my former research and current research. So my own PhD was a zoology PhD. It was behavioral ecology. It was on the species featured in the photograph on the top left of the screen, and that is fallow deer. Since then, I've been involved in cattle research. I'm going to talk to you about goat research today, but I've also been involved in chicken research, especially in relation to their vocalizations, and how vocalizations can tell us a few things about their welfare states, but I'm not going to go into that today. But a common thread throughout this, I've always had an interest in vocal communication. So when I was studying fallow deer many years ago for my PhD, it was in relation to sort of sexual selection and mating and dominance and all of that. Now I work on vocalizations, but more from a point of view of how can we use them to infer welfare states. One of the other main themes that I've tried to get involved in, but it's stalled a little bit, is public attitudes to animal welfare and animal sentience and welfare. And that is definitely related to what I'm talking about today, but I'm not going to go into it in great detail. We published a paper 6 years ago, Theory of Animal Mind, Human Nature, or Experimental Artifact, essentially about how humans form their theories about what animals are feeling or what animals are capable of doing in terms of their cognitive capacities and things like that. So I'm not going to go into that today. I do touch on it later on in my talk when I bring everything back together. But I have been interested in public attitudes to animal sentience and welfare and how we form our opinions of what animals are thinking or how they suffer or are they suffering or not suffering. And that paper was published back in 2017. The other thing, of course, I'm happy to share this PowerPoint or a PDF copy with Sunday, and so any of you can have access to it afterwards and check out the links. So why study goats? Well, goats are hugely important on a worldwide scale. As I said, we started working on them about 16 years ago. At that time, there was only one research group across the world. I'm not saying I know everything about all research groups, but at the time I was only aware of one research group publishing good quality research in sort of good peer review international journals. And that seemed odd to me. It was at the time when I moved from Switzerland to the UK. I was looking around for a new model species to work with. I wanted to do experimental work. I wanted to do cognitive work. I wanted to make a difference to the lives of animals through that work as well. The UK, as many of you know, has a rich history of animal welfare research. So I didn't want to just sort of join in another group and sort of do or repeat something else, repeat something that somebody else was doing. So there were groups already established working on cattle, sheep, pigs in particular, chickens as well. And there was no one, to my knowledge, working on goats. Of course, goats are not hugely important in a UK context. There are only about a population of 100,000 goats in the UK, but I knew globally they were really important. So according to the latest figures I saw recently, we know that there are about 1 billion goats on the planet. 94% of those are divided across Asia and Africa. And for example, the estimated population of goats in Africa is 361 million. In China alone, there are 190 million estimated. But of course, there are other big populations across Asia, particularly India, places like that. So it was remarkable. Even when we started working on them 16 years ago, it was remarkable to me that there were so many goats on the planet, but so little known about them. So that is one of the major reasons we started studying goats. Sorry, and I forgot one thing. I just wanted to mention as well, in terms of breeds, there are hundreds of breeds across the world, but we can basically divide them into 3 main types. On the bottom left of this slide, there are Boer goats, which, as the name suggests, originally a South African breed, and they have been developed for meat. On the bottom right, they are Angora goats, so they've been developed for fiber, and top right are salmons, I think, and it's kind of obvious that they are a breed that have been developed for milk and cheese production. So, of course, there are mixed breeds as well, and mixed use breeds, but they are the 3 broad main types, but there are hundreds of goat breeds across the world. The other thing is to acknowledge that over 15 or 16 years of doing this work, this is a small number of the people that have helped, in particular, Elodie Briefer and Luigi Bacciadonna on the top left, Marianne Mason, bottom left corner, actually. She is now a doctor. She defended her PhD thesis only a couple of months ago. There are many other students and others, researchers that have contributed to the research that I'm presenting to you today. I was often stuck in my office writing grants or writing papers or teaching or doing admin work while they got to do most of the research, and I would do occasional visits. So much of the data collection I'm presenting obviously was presented by these fantastic researchers and others that are not even on the slide. So if you don't know anything about goat domestication, just to give you a quick rundown, well, overall, in terms of domesticated species, dogs are believed to be the oldest or the species that has been domesticated for the longest. Estimates vary, but I've seen everything from sort of 15,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, 25,000 years ago. I'm not sure what age they've settled or date they've settled on at the moment. Goats were the first domesticated livestock species. We know this from a relatively old paper, 23 years ago, published in Science. The earliest domesticated goat remains were found in present-day Zagros Mountains in present-day West Iran. So dogs were the first domesticated species overall, but goats were certainly the first domesticated livestock species. And they were domesticated from bezoar goats, and bezoar goats still exist in the wild. So goats have had a very long time and many generations to adapt to living with us. Some of the topics I'm going to touch on today: first steps in terms of what we were doing in terms of vocal communication in the early days of our goat research, and importantly, goats recovering from former neglect or abuse. I'm going to touch on goat emotions, how they express them, and other goats perceiving emotions. I'm going to go through a little bit about clever goats and their problem-solving abilities and their memories, some of their human behaviors, some of their perception of human emotions and human facial expressions linked to emotions, and finally tell you something about Hong Kong research. Now, don't get worried. There are, 6 topics here. I touch on them very briefly. Most of them, I am not going to keep you here for hours. I do intend to stick closely to time or even try to finish early if I can. So first of all, just to briefly mention, in the early days, working with Elodie Briefer, Elodie and I had a background of working on animal communication. We were interested to start working on vocal communication in goats. There wasn't a lot known back in the late noughties, and the little bit of stuff that there was known hadn't really been done very well. So we started studying mother-offspring communication and how mothers communicate with their offspring and how quickly recognition happens after birth. The other thing I should have clarified is most of the goat research that I'm presenting to you today has been carried out at a place called Buttercup Sanctuary for Goats near London in the UK, but not this mother-offspring research. Buttercups was mentioned on the opening slide. There was a photograph. That is because, of course, Buttercup Sanctuary for Goats is, as the name suggests, is a sanctuary. It would not be ethical to be breeding goats at a sanctuary. So this early work on goats that we did in terms of mother-offspring communication was done at a petting zoo facility where they were actually breeding the goats. But getting back to the goats and why we were studying them, we were interested in finding out how quickly after kid goats have been born, do they learn to recognize their mothers, and how quickly do mother goats learn to recognize their kids. We tested them after a couple of days, and we tested them again after a couple of weeks. There's a big background literature into why we were doing this, which I won't go into now, but we did show, of course, we already know that the sense of smell is super important for fast recognition after mothers give birth to their offspring, but we were specifically interested in the vocalizations. So goats learn to recognize, mother goats learn to recognize their kids quickly, and kids learn to recognize their mothers. The more novel aspect of that was Elodie Briefer returned. So the goats got weaned, the kids got taken away from their mothers. And I think actually those goats went to slaughter. It was a petting zoo facility, so they went for meat production. So Elodie returned to the same mother goats the following year. The kids had been taken away from them, and then she played the recordings of the kids back to the mothers to see if the mother goats still recognized the sounds of their own kids. Those mothers had not seen, heard, or interacted with their kids for at least eight months. And when Elodie played the calls of those kid goats back to the mothers remembered their kids, which is remarkable. Well, maybe it's not remarkable in the sense that, you know, the mother-offspring bond is really strong for many mammals, but people were not expecting to see this result for goats at all, because, you know, goats have well, I'll come back to it later on, but goats have a bit of a reputation for not being particularly clever. Although if you talk to any goat farmers or anyone with any experience around goats, they will certainly know how clever their goats are and how difficult it is to keep them fenced in. But this was a remarkable memory ability that mother goats were able to remember the calls of their kids, even though those kids had been taken away at least 8 months ago. But maybe you would predict it according to the maternal bond. We were lucky enough at the time, this got quite a lot of media attention, and one of the examples I posted in here was there was a report, believe it or not, in the New York Times, in a chorus of bleats, one that sounds familiar, and that was about our paper that was published in Proceedings of the Royal Society. One of the other really important studies we did early on, and this was now work that we were doing at Buttercup Sanctuary for Goats, was to test goats that had been there for a while to see if they had recovered from the abuse that they had experienced. So Buttercup Sanctuary for Goats is a goat sanctuary. It's about 1 hour drive southeast of London. They have a resident population of about 130 goats. A large number of those goats come to Buttercup's goats and they've been treated really well, but the people who kept them are moving away, or they're moving into a different house where they don't have space to keep goats. They don't have a field big enough to keep goats, or they're leaving the country. So some of the goats that live at Buttercups have had good lives and are just given to Buttercups to live out the remains of their lives. Other goats have been rescued. So they've typically been abused. The police have been called, they've been rescued by the SPCA and various other animal rescue facilities, and they come to Buttercups eventually. So one of the early things we did was to test to see if the goats had suffered abuse, recovered from that abuse. We used something called the cognitive bias test. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but we were able to show that the goats that had, and we had detailed history of these goats taken by the SPCA and various other organizations. For example, one of the goats we worked at had been abused, had been kept in a small pen, had had its tail cut off. Another one had been doused in diesel. In fact, his name was Diesel, and left for weeks in a small pen and unclean. So some of these goats had been treated in a really horrendous way. But using the cognitive bias test that we deployed, and this paper was published back in 2013, we were able to show that the goats that had formerly been abused had recovered from that abuse. With the caveat that all the goats that we tested had been at least 1 year living at Buttercups, both the abused goats and the non-abused goats. The reason they had to be at Buttercups for a year before we could test them is because the goats that came in and had been mistreated, they were simply too nervous around people. You couldn't really work with them or carry out the test. They would be too nervous. So if we were trying to study their mood or anything like that in relation to their cognition, they would have been too afraid of us. So they had to get used to the facility and be living in quite a relaxed way before we could even test them. Again, luckily, we put out a press release for this study and it was featured on BBC News. And that's the link that's there. You can't click on that link, but I have provided the link on the right. It's also available from my website. So it's called Happy Goats, How Animal Rehab Works. That was hugely important for the sanctuary we were working at, but also hugely important for the people that rescue animals, because you can show that even when they've suffered serious abuse, once you give them good care and take care of them really well, they can actually recover from it. Okay, so getting on to one of the main aspects of my talk, one of the other things that we really wanted to get involved with was emotions and measuring emotions in goats. And I'm going to jump forward a slide or two and come back and tell you why we were interested in studying emotions. So one of the things I'm not presenting to you today is the 5 freedoms in terms of saving time. Hopefully many of you are familiar with the 5 freedoms. The 5 freedoms have been developed further over the past sort of 15 years in particular, and we now look to the 5 domains and the 5 domains and how they're related to positive animal welfare. So the 5 domains contain the same 5 categories as the 5 freedoms in terms of 1, nutrition, 2, environment, 3, health, 4, behavior, and 5, mental state. But now, for example, sorry, I'm just losing track because my own dog is barking in the background and I hope you can't hear it, sorry. Anyway, so getting back to the 5 domains, they are similar to the 5 freedoms, but one of the big criticisms, the 5 freedoms are old. One of the big criticisms of the 5 freedoms was that they focus, or one of the criticisms of the 5 freedoms was they very much focus on the absence of negative states. And of course, the absence of negative states is not the same as having a good life. So what the 5 domains does is flesh out these categories in terms of nutrition, environment, health, behavior, and mental state, and not just providing examples of absence of negatives, but actually gives examples of positives. So this table, taken from an animal welfare paper in 2015, I don't expect you to be able to read the detail. All I'm saying is in the red, the ones under the red are the examples of the negatives, and the greens are examples of positives. But the 5 domains are really key to positive welfare, and positive welfare means providing animals with opportunities to play, make their own decisions, or to have positive social relationships. So thus, animal welfare should not be evaluated by the absence of negative states, but also by the presence of a good life. So where do we go with this? Well, the next step is we need to be able to understand when animals are having a good life. Part of that is when animals are experiencing positive emotions, and that leads me to my next slide. So emotions, whether they be in a human or a goat or a dog, emotions are intense, short, effective reactions to information that you perceive in the environment, or a goat perceives in the environment, or a dog perceives in the environment. If you look at the chart on the left side, or the figure on the left side of your screen, we can look at emotions using a dimensional approach. On the x-axis, we've got negative and positive valence, so whether something is negative or positive, and then we've got high arousal and low arousal. So, for example, the top right quadrant of the screen is positive and high arousal, so it's positive and high arousal, so a good example of that is excited. On the bottom left, we have sad, so that's negative and low arousal. So essentially, if you want to study emotions in animals, what you need to do is sort of treat them in different ways and generate these sort of states and then measure various components. And one thing you don't want to do, of course, is stress the animals. You just treat them in a mildly positive or a mildly negative way to make sure that the research is actually ethical. And then you measure how the animals are behaving. You measure the cognition of the animals in terms of their attention, their learning, or their decision-making. You can measure the behavior of the animals. So, for example, how they're moving, how their whole body is moving, their ear posture, their tail posture. Another thing you can do is measure their neurophysiology. And usually when measuring neurophysiology, we measure heart rate or heart rate variability. Heart rate, we know, is a very good measure of arousal. Heart rate variability, there's pretty good evidence that heart rate variability is a good measure of valence. And of course, if you were studying emotions in humans, you could ask them. So if anybody goes to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, typically they fill out a questionnaire, and that's the subjective approach where humans can report their own emotional states. So this chart is taken originally from Russell 2003, which is a review of the human psychology or psychiatry literature. And then Professor Mike Mendel at Bristol and his team sort of took this approach and published it in 2010 as a way to get at animal emotions. So going back, so this is exactly what we did with this study back in 2015. We took a group of goats, we treated them in slightly different ways to create sort of slightly negative and positive emotions, and then measured their physiology, we measured their behaviors, and we took recordings of their vocalizations and actually analyzed those as well. So moving forward, just getting into details, again, in this study, we used 22 goats. We treated them all in the same 4 ways. So the control, as you can see on the left, is just them in a pen eating hay. At our study site, they have access to hay all the time. They like eating hay, but it doesn't particularly make them excited. In terms of the food anticipation, that was our negative treatment. Or sorry, food anticipation was positive treatment. So in this situation, for example, we chopped up some carrots and apples, pieces, put them in a bucket. The goats knew that they were getting carrots and apples and they really liked them. So you just shake them in the bucket and let the goat know that they're about to get this, and it generates excitement in a positive way. The other thing is food frustration, and I'm going to show you a movie of that in a second, but food frustration is a negative treatment. So as anyone who has any experience of goats knows, goats are highly motivated by food. So in this one, what we did was put our test goat in a pen and then put another goat adjacent to it in another pen and feed the other goat for 5 minutes. So basically our test goat gets no food for 5 minutes and is watching another one eating, which they don't like at all. And the final treatment we did was isolation, where we simply took them out of the herd, moved them about 50 meters or 100 meters from the herd, and put them in a pen on their own. Again, we didn't take them away from the study side. They were not that far from the rest of the herd. They knew the rest of the herd was nearby. So the idea was to create mildly negative or positive situations, not really stress them out completely. If you can see the photograph on the top right-hand side of the screen, that shows one of our study animals. Actually, his name was Jimmy. He is wearing a belt around his chest, and he is wearing a device called bioharness. That bioharness is picking up his heart rate and his heart rate variability and relaying it in real time to a nearby laptop computer via Bluetooth. So while the experiment is happening, we could actually see that we were recording Jimmy's heart rate and heart rate variability. Of course, everything was analyzed back in the lab later on. So this was a hell of a lot of work. LOD Briefer and some others were mainly doing it. There was a lot of analysis, but I just want to show you one of the quick results, or one of the quick treatments and one of the results. Hang on a second. Let me just move this around on my screen. So what you can see here, I'm going to show you a quick movie of the food frustration experiment, or a couple of seconds of it. On the screen, you can see a goat. You can probably see the black belt around its chest. In a couple of seconds, when I play this, a person will come in on the left. There is another goat on the left-hand side of the screen that you can't see very well. A person will come in, feed the goat, and then our test goat gets to look at that animal eating. So it's not a particularly nice experience for a goat, but they're super food motivated. But of course, we did feed the goat at the end. But the idea was to create a mild negative state. So hopefully you can hear it, and they're the goat calls. So we had a microphone set up as well that was pointing down at the goat, and we recorded any of the vocalizations that they actually made, which is really important because I'm going to mention this in a second. And the goat calls again, and that's it. So I'm not going to show you the others. That paper was published in 2015, so 8 years ago. There was a ton of analysis going into the behavior, going into the vocalizations, going into the heart rate and the heart rate variability, and essentially comparing the same goats treated in the different ways. But one of the key things that we found was in the positive situations versus the negative situations, the pitch of their calls was more stable. So basically, the sound of their voice was a bit more pure. So when I'm trying to explain this, I always say it's a bit like, imagine you're getting up to give a speech in public. At the start, your voice might be a little bit shaky because you're a little bit nervous. And as you relax a little bit more, the call becomes a bit more stable. So of course, goats are not people and people are not goats, but it's similar. So the sound of their calls is more stable. So if I wanted to monitor goats and how they're doing, I would probably deploy a system, if they're indoors at least, and monitor the types of calls they're producing and monitor if they're producing lots of calls that are indicating they're in a negative state versus a positive state. That has informed the later chicken research that I've been doing, but I'm not going into that today. So this sort of finding is becoming known as an iceberg indicator. So what does that mean? Well, you know, us as researchers working at universities or working at research stations, we have to do lots and lots of tests and lots of detailed experiments. But of course, we can't go out and ask farmers or anybody else to measure 30 different variables. Farmers and people who are working with these animals need a few simple indicators. And so it's our job as researchers to work and carry out the detailed experiments and then provide farmers with these sort of indicators. One of the other follow-on projects then from that research, we had recordings of goats in different situations. If I could ask everyone just to mute yourselves, that would be great, please. Thank you very much. Anyway, so we had recordings of goats in several different situations. We had recordings of goats in food frustration situation. We had recordings of goats in food anticipation, and we had the isolation calls. Using a computer program and software, we could tell the difference between these calls, but it was important. Goats are herd living animals, so it was important to test the goats to see if they could tell the difference, and that's essentially what we did. So we carried out what's called a habituation, dishabituation, rehabituation experiment. It sounds complicated, but it's not really. You basically play 9 calls of the same type, then you follow it up with 3 calls of a different type. And essentially, the goat, if the goat can tell the difference between the 2 call types, they should show dishabituation. So during habituation, they essentially get a bit bored of the call type. It's not exactly the same call, but it's the same call type. So we play 9 calls with a couple of seconds in between each one, or 20 seconds between each one, in an enclosure from a loudspeaker to the goat. And then the goat gets habituated to those calls. Then you change the call type and see if the goat gets alert again to the call. And I'm not going to go into the rehabituation. There's no need to do that. We used 24 goats in these experiments. And this, I'll show you a quick movie. This is one of the goats. And what this is doing is, this is transition PNP. This is basically, it transitions from the food anticipation to the isolation. So in this particular example, it's changing from a positive call type to a negative call type at call 8 to 9. So that represents dishabituation, but I'm not going to play you this video for several minutes. I just want to show you what it looks like. So this is our test goat in an enclosure at Buttercup Sanctuary for Goats. There are white lines with a bit of chalk across the ground because these videos were coded back in the lab. And basically there is a loudspeaker hidden away playing these calls to the goat. First of all, the habituation phase and then the dishabituation to see if the goat notices the difference. So initially, of course, when the goat hears this loudspeaker playing goat calls, she's sort of really alert. But then, as I said, she gets habituated or a bit bored with these calls. So that's another goat call being played. So 20-second intervals between them. And she's also wearing the bioharness around her chest so that we can measure heart rate and heart rate variability later. So a quick summary of the results. So when we scored the behavior and analyzed the behavior, you can look at the top figure that I'm looking at the moment, mean looking behavior. And that's essentially a count of the number of times the goat was looking towards the loudspeaker. So H1 is when she first encountered the calls coming out of the loudspeaker at one end of the enclosure. She looks a lot. And then basically her attention drops off. And then importantly, when we play the different call type at 10, 11, 12, first there's a sort of freezing response, and then she shows an alertness that tells us that she can tell the difference between these calls. Of course, the data are a bit messy, but the evidence is strong enough. When it comes to heart rate, it simply decreased throughout the experiment, which is exactly what we expected. In terms of heart rate variability, the data were messy, not particularly convincing. There is some evidence that during the playback of the positive calls, valence was higher, but as I said, it's a bit messy and I wouldn't bet my house on it, to be honest. But the behavioral result alone was convincing enough. So this was published back in 2019, and again, it received widespread coverage in the media. I have included two of them there. It was reported by National Geographic, and it was also reported by The Guardian in the UK. So I'm going to go quickly. I'm going on with time, but believe it or not, I don't have I have a couple of more slides. They won't take too long. One of the other things we wanted to look at was problem-solving ability or intelligence in the goats. So as I said, goats have a public perception for maybe being a bit stupid, but if you ask anybody who works with goats, keeps goats as pets, or talk to farmers, they definitely know that goats are not stupid. But we wanted to test that using a sort of acceptable type test. And so for that, we turned to the artificial fruit box, which is something that was developed for testing primates. And it was developed by a professor at St. Andrews University in the UK, Andy Whiten, and his team. But basically, the key thing about the artificial fruit task is it's not just sort of pulling a lever and getting a piece of food, because that's relatively simple. What the animal has to do is actually pull a lever, then do a second step, and then get the food reward. So the photograph on the left is a chimpanzee with the artificial fruit task from somebody else's research, and our version of the artificial fruit task, which Luigi Baciadonna and Elodie Briefer built, is on the right. So essentially, it's a large plastic box. Within it is a smaller little plastic box, and the goat has to learn to pull a lever and then lift a lever to get a food reward out. These are movies of this in action. So you can see the goat here. I'll play it in a second. It's a large plastic box. There is a small piece of a food reward inside the box, and the goat has to pull out a lever, lift the lever, and then it gets the food reward.
Yeah, she didn't want to by the rope. Some of them don't like.
So there is a little bit of variability, and some goats are better than others, which is fair enough, but generally they are very good at doing this task. So hopefully you can see and hear them doing it. So 9 of the 12 goats successfully learned the task within 8 to 13 trials, which is really fast. So 9 of the 12. So what happened to the other ones? 1 couldn't do it. 1 tried to break the box open with its horn. So we had to take it away because we had only 1 box and it took quite a while to put it together. And actually, right now, I can't remember why the other one failed, but they were reasonable fails anyway. But 1 couldn't do it, and 9 of the 12 could do it, which is really good. The other interesting thing was Elodie went back the following year and tested to see if they remembered it. Now, if you remember from earlier in the talk, I told you that mother goats could remember the sound of their kid calls. And you might say, well, of course they would. They evolved to have a really strong mother-offspring bond or a maternal bond with their kids. Of course they would remember them. This is important because, of course, this is a plastic box and they're getting food out of it. Goats did not evolve to get food out of a plastic box using a two-step task, but all the ones that got it were able to solve it the following year with no training whatsoever. So this shows that goats have long-term memory for general cognitive abilities. That also has implications if we mistreat them, because they likely remember it for a long time. And that was published as well. And also, we were lucky enough to get a lot of media attention across the world, including that German report in Spiegel. The link at the bottom of the page is a link to my website with a lot of this media coverage from the various research. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move quickly into the last section. This will not take long. There is a big area of animal behavior and animal welfare research looking at animal-human interactions. A lot of this is discussed in the context of domestication. So, for example, dogs are a huge topic of study with papers appearing almost every day about dog behavior. And one of the key aspects of that dog research is looking to see how has domestication shaped their behavior. So with that in mind, there are lots of people studying dogs, but importantly, there are a couple of groups across the world that have hand-reared wolf puppies into adulthood, because obviously you cannot test adult wolves that haven't been raised by people generally, because it's impossible to work with them. They would be too dangerous. So there are a couple of groups that have managed to hand-rear wolf puppies, and then they can compare their cognitive abilities with that of dogs. One of the early things they did was the unsolvable problem task, comparing the cognition of dogs and wolves. So don't worry about the Zoom bombers. It happens. It's inevitable with meetings like this. We kick them out and we just keep going, essentially. But getting back to wolves and dogs, essentially the unsolvable problem task sounds a bit complicated, and it's not at all. Basically, you put a piece of food into a box, you leave the lid on, but loosely, not closed, shut tightly. And then, for example, a dog will go over to that box and get the food out. Similarly, if you do the same with wolves, they will approach a box, get a food reward out if the lid is not closed. Then what McCluskey and his team did was they actually closed the box. So suddenly it becomes an unsolvable problem task. So what happens in that situation? Well, in the unsolvable problem task, when a dog is there and a human is nearby, what happens is dogs typically look to the human. And that is interpreted, or has been interpreted, as the dog seeking help from the human present. When they test wolves that have been hand-reared, the wolves tend not to look at the human present. They often just try to break the box open with their teeth. So that was interpreted as a key feature of domestication, and dogs look towards humans in terms of cooperating with humans or getting help with humans. I mean, that has been discussed for years. The discussion over this task is still ongoing, but in the interest of time, of course, I'm not going to go into that in great detail, but essentially that's the idea, that over many generations, dogs have evolved and been domesticated and changed in order to communicate effectively with humans. Wolves haven't, because they haven't gone through the same domestication. But the key thing is that an effect of domestication for working closely with humans, or is a general domestication effect? And so that's why we tested goats, which is what I'm going to present to you now. So we did the same thing. We presented goats. In this situation here, the goat is just going to walk over. The goat is going to be released. The goat goes over, the box is open. It just pushes the lid aside and then gets a piece of food out. So this is the solvable task. It's fairly simple. Sorry, as I clicked the wrong way and played the wrong one. So this is the training where the box is not closed, the goat is released. This is Nadia, the goat, and she goes over and pushes the box aside and gets the food out easily. So this is when it becomes unsolvable. So in the same situation, the box is closed, and also the person there either looks towards the box or looks away. You will see both. So the box is closed. The goat looks towards the person present. And in this situation, the person present has his back turned to her. So in this particular situation, it's a fairly simple test, but as you can see, the behavior of the goat changes depending on whether the person is looking towards or looking away. So, as I said, it's a fairly simple test, but before we did this, people didn't expect goats to behave in this way. They thought dogs would do it, but not goats. And this is another quick clip, the same goat, one of the other trials. So as you can see clearly, the goat is trying to draw the attention of the humans. So it's not really differing that much compared to how a dog might be predicted to behave. So this was published in 2016 in Biology Letters. Again, it attracted a lot of media attention. Goats are more like dogs than we thought. Dogs are out, goats may be man's new best friend. Of course, there's exaggeration because these are news media reports, but at least it gets the results out to the general audience. So goats might be more like dogs than we thought. Another one of the tests we did was to check if goats could tell the difference between angry human faces and happy human faces. And I will show you a quick clip of this. And as expected, in the vast majority of cases, goats were essentially trained to walk across an arena. They weren't trained when there were photographs there. Then we put photographs there, black and white photographs of humans either smiling or with an angry face, and they were much more likely to approach smiling faces. That was published in 2018 and reported again across the world from the US to China and even India and places like that. So that gets me onto the final minute or two of my talk. I am nearly finished, but that's where impact and outreach comes in. So it's really important if we are doing animal cognition research related to animal welfare that we get the news out to the general public. And I feel strongly about that. So we've had a host of reports over the years across, there's a report in the middle of the screen from Italian news. But at the sanctuary where we've worked at, you can see some photographs as well where we've done some filming. We've also done demonstration days to the general public. Because we cannot hope to influence or change animal welfare regulations and improve the lives of animals unless we get the results out to the general public. And we do that by issuing press releases and talking to the public in general. So I mentioned to you at the start that goats have had a reputation for being a little bit stupid. There are lots of social media clips where goats are perceived as being stupid, and that might be a view of the general public, but just to reiterate, it's not a view of the farmers that typically work with them. So our research has helped, I think, dispel some of these myths about stupid goats, and we prefer to present this sort of idea. This is a photograph, it's not mine. It was part of a report, and I actually can't remember the report, but it was on social media in response to one of our papers from just a few years ago. The other thing is we were lucky a couple of years ago to actually film a documentary with German and French television, and it's called Into Farm Animal Minds, and that is free and it is online, and you will be able to access it if you want to check it out. It's about 50 minutes long, and we filmed, I think, 4 or 5 of our experiments. So it's really important to do animal cognition research. It's really important also to get the results of that research out to the general public. Sorry, just some interference. So one other important thing, so the paper that was published in 2018, Goats Prefer Positive Human Emotional Facial Expressions. Luckily, the Brook, which is a really important international organization, they mainly focus on equid welfare in terms of horses and donkeys, but they also produce a whole lot of important and fantastic resources in relation to animal welfare in general. And they produced this guide to animal handling in 2020, and they actually featured some of our research. Let me just see it. So on the bottom right, where the yellow arrow appears, they have stated goats generally prefer to interact with happy faces, meaning handlers should be aware of the subtle subtle emotional cues they may be given out. And that is taken directly from our paper published in 2018. So it's important to move from the sort of academia of publishing papers and getting the results out to the people who work with animals. Just a quick word of caution. I've spoken a lot about animal cognition and welfare, but I'm not going to go into this in detail. But the note of caution is that there has been fantastic changes in relation to the care of crustaceans like crabs and lobsters in the UK over the last 5-8 years. A lot of those changes in legislation and the lobbying for changes in legislation don't come about as a result of showing that crabs or crustaceans have advanced cognition, but they do come about as a result of showing that crabs are capable of feeling pain. And actually, from the earlier research that I did with Caroline Spence, the person I was working with on terms of public perception of animal welfare and sentience, in terms of the general public very much cares for if animals can feel pain or if animals actually suffer. They also understand about animal cognition a little bit, and animal consciousness and sentience and intelligence. But the number 1 and 2 things for the general public are about animals feeling pain rather than cognition. But it doesn't mean we should stop doing the cognitive research as well. In terms of Hong Kong research, now I'm working with a team of people, Dr. Kate Flay and 2 PhDs, Tanya Peru and George Hudson. And believe it or not, Hong Kong has a population of about 1,000 feral cattle, and we're working on their behavior, health and welfare currently. And the other thing is we're just about to start working on the population of feral buffalo, believe it or not. There is a population of feral water buffalo living in Hong Kong. And Dr. De Bottom arrived just a couple of days ago and is starting work on them. And that is me done. I may have gone over time a little bit, so apologies for that. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Sorry, I may need to go off video for a bit. My internet has been a bit unstable, so let me just go off bit for a bit and hope that it becomes a bit more stabilized. But here is also me announcing at this point also that in case my internet does at any point malfunction again, one of the team members, Praise Akobo, will be stepping in on my behalf, and also in case Praise has to step in. So just to be sure no one gets surprised why if she has to step in. So there's a question in the chat that I would put to you at this point. So someone was asking, so that's Fami now, Fami from Indonesia. He's asking, he says he's interested, he loves your work, and wants to ask if the research method used for goats is specific to a particular goat or goats in general. Says because, as we know, that there are so many types of goat around the globe that are specific to geographical and human cultural conditions.
Good question. I mean, working at the goat sanctuary, we don't get to choose the particular breed. So all the research we've done is generally across a mix of breeds, and they're usually maybe only 3, 4, or 5 of a particular breed. So all the research should be applicable to other goats, but of course we haven't tested the other breeds. There are bound to be breed differences. For example, I know one breed, which I think the numbers are not that high, but one of the breeds that they have at Buttercup Sanctuary for goats is called the Golden Guernsey breed. Anyone familiar with goats might know them. We know that they are particularly timid and quiet, and we generally didn't work with them in case they got a little bit stressed. So there are bound to be breed differences, but all the experiments we did with goats at Buttercup Sanctuary for goats was using different breeds.
Okay, thank you so much. So there's 2 other questions, or there's 3 other questions in the chat. I'll probably just read them all up so you respond quickly because of time. So someone asked and said, I was wondering whether goats in herds, so Double Tam, right? I'm hoping I pronounced the name right. He's asking, I was wondering whether goats in herds would differ in their emotional reactions in contrast to them being tested partially separated, especially in potentially stressful situations, e.g. in line with social buffering hypothesis. That's one. And then the other would be, there's a question from Dr. Shadid Abifa, I saw from Shadid, right? Was asking, okay, what are the insights into behavioral research in cattle?
Where is the question on cattle? Oh, sorry. What are the insights into behavioral research in cattle? That's a good question. I think the person means in relation to, can we tell anything from cattle, or can we tell anything about cattle from this sort of research? I mean, the simple thing is, well, not simple at all, but there are logistic reasons why we can't do this on cattle. They're far bigger, they're potentially more dangerous. So doing experiments like this on cattle are almost impossible simply due to their size. The other thing is, it's very rare to have cattle. There are a few now that I know of, but it's very rare to have cattle at sanctuaries. When cattle in the get to the end of their productive lives. They're generally slaughtered and turned into meat. But I am pretty sure that cattle emotions have great similarities with the emotions of goats. It's just that we cannot study them in the same way. So yeah, that's the answer to that. In relation to the other question, would their behavior be different because they're herd animals? So being tested partially separated, for example, about social buffering. So I am sure there is social buffering in goats, but of course, again, the logistics of carrying out experiments like this, it's almost impossible to carry out this sort of experiment and allow your single goat to remain with the herd. And we have to start somewhere, and maybe somebody else can devise how we can actually do that. But testing the goats while they're still interacting with the other members of the herd. The thing is, when we tested the goats, you saw the food frustration experiment. And I mean, that was at the study side, and all the rest of the goats were just outside the house. So at least the goat was aware that the rest of the herd was nearby. So there's a certain element of social buffering going on when we test the goats and buttercups anyway, because we wouldn't want to take them away from the study side and make them super stressed. That's not the point of the research. So yes, there is social buffering going on, but to actually quantify that is very difficult because of the logistics of testing them alone or in the middle of a herd. I think Sunday is still online.
Okay, Dr. Lang, thank you very much for.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you for that question. Thank you for responding to that question. He's actually online, but I think his network isn't so stable at the moment. So I'll just go to asking the next question quickly. Okay, so someone said that he would like to know more about positive and negative reinforcement when it comes to, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you fine. I just muted myself, but I can hear you, no problem.
Okay, all right, thank you. So the person said, I would like to know more about positive and negative reinforcements when it comes to...
I'm not sure if I can fully understand the question. I mean, that may be in relation to animal training or something, which is not really something I do. But there have been big changes in relation to animal training in terms of dog training these days to have positive reinforcement and things like that. But you're probably better off asking a dog trainer rather than me.
Okay, so I'll ask
problem.
a research question. I think this is peculiar to the person. How do I get opportunities to carry out welfare research?
I mean, as I said at the very start, actually, talking Sunday, I was amazed when I went to Gaborone in South Africa, Gaborone in Southern Africa, Gaborone is in Botswana, of course, last October, November, and I was amazed at the amount of animal welfare work that is already going on in Africa. And also, Sean has mentioned some opportunities in terms of getting grant funding. So I would say that there is a lot already going on, and maybe people need to network a little bit more. But it's fantastic to have this meeting here today. So there are opportunities. Funding is often the limitation, but even then there are some opportunities as well. And in the chat earlier on, I posted in a link for the UFAW. I think it was Beth Ventura posted in a link for ASAP grants. So there are some opportunities. So I would say it's a combination of, for students studying hard, getting good grades, networking with the right people, applying for grants, you know, so there are chances.
All right, sir, thank you very much. Thank you so much for the questions.
Thank you.
We will be going on to introducing the next speaker. I think Dr. Sunday is here, so he would be introducing the next speaker right away.
Okay, my internet has been a bit unstable, but then I'm back. So thank you so much, Alan, for the presentation. At this point, we'll just, because of time, we're a bit behind time, so we'll just switch to the next speaker and just continue immediately. So the next speaker is someone who is a senior lecturer at Hartpury University. He has a multidimensional background in canine behavior, training and welfare. He is a he has senior managerial experience in operations, education, and evaluation of canine staff in the armed forces, in the public, in the private and charity sectors. He is a member of the Animal Assisted Interventions Alliance of the University of Queensland and Pinos Nose Dog Assisted Interventions Multidisciplinary Team in Athens, Greece. He is an ABTC registered clinical animal behaviorist and full member of the Association of Pet Behavior Counselors. He's the author of 3 books, and he sees dogs on behavioral referral from veterinary surgeons in Greece and in the UK. Here to speak on the topic clinical animal behavior, please make welcome Evangelos Diamantakos.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today in this second conference of animal behavior and welfare in Africa, organized and hosted by Dogalov. Let me very briefly introduce myself. My name is Evangelos Diamandakos, and I'm a senior lecturer in canine science at Hartpury University in the UK. Alongside, I work as a clinical animal behaviorist, dog trainer, instructor, and animal assisted interventions researcher, designer, and facilitator. Moreover, I provide consulting services in animal behavior, training, education, welfare, management, and operational development. I'm a member of the Society for Companion Animal Studies, the Animal Assisted Intervention Alliance of the University of Queensland, and Kinos Nose Dog Assisted Intervention programs. Let me tell you at that point that the Society for Companion Animal Studies is a great organization, is funding research. It's worth visiting their website, and among others, you're going to see that they're delivering some fantastic webinars, some great CBD opportunities there. So I've been working with dogs and people who love dogs for more than 30 years, and I feel very fortunate about it. During these years, I have gained experience while working in various canine and animal departments and projects in the public, private, and charity sector, the armed forces, and the academia. I'm delighted to participate as a presenter in this conference, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. I have chosen to present to you a topic that I'm very passionate about: clinical animal behavior. The main topics discussed in this presentation are animal behavior, contribution to the society and science, areas of study and research, which factors influence behavior, behavior problems, veterinary behaviorist and clinical animal behaviorist accreditation, ABTC accreditation, clinical animal behaviorist application process via APBC. So, animal behavior. What is animal behavior? We could argue that animal behavior encapsulates and describes all actions which are exhibited or revealed by animals individually or in groups. These behaviors can be inherited, instinctual, or learned. The animal behaviorists are utilizing several approaches in their attempts to study and interpret animal behavior and I will very briefly summarize them. The methodological behaviorism, which is based on the observation of motor behaviors. The radical behaviorism, where the role of the environment and operant are catalytic and highly important. The applied behavior analysis and functional behavior assessment, where animal cognition, emotion, and evidence-based treatment are providing valuable information and a very interesting insight. Body language, the body gestures and facial expressions through which animals are revealing signs for their physical and psychological states. And last but not least, the animal's organism biological functions and the role of genes in affecting and determining behaviors. I could say that the cornerstone of the animal behaviorist's contribution to the society and science is the promotion of the animal welfare with everything that this term embraces and actually means. So as part of it, we will see animal behaviorists studying and conducting research on the behavioral motives, functions, and the development and evolution of behavior. Design and apply behavioral modification programs for the prevention, management, and/or cure of behavioral problems. Counseling and/or coaching owners on how they can better train their pets, targeting to a healthy relationship and harmonic symbiosis. Educate the general public and specific professional groups like animal carers, handlers, and trainers in order to promote health and safety and facilitate best practice. In our days, we will see animal behaviorists in many university departments of psychology, veterinary, zoology, anthrozoology, animal science, and ecology. In governmental and non-governmental organizations operating in the wider areas of health, ecology, environment, animal protection, etc. In public and private health, education, and social care institutions. Here, I'm mainly referring to the animal behavior's contribution to animal-assisted intervention programs like horse-assisted therapies, dog-assisted education, and dog-assisted activities. Moreover, animal behaviorists are working in the vast majority of zoos and animal shelters and charities around the world. The areas of study and research are centered around the three basic instincts: survive, eat, and reproduce. So animal behavior researchers are interested in how animals obtain and reserve or protect resources, avoid enemies and danger in general, their social structures and dynamics, how they mate and reproduce, offspring care and upbringing, the various forms of human-animal interaction, and the adaptation to their environmental context. It is worth mentioning here that their approaches are, among others, characterized by teleology, meaning the explanation by reference to some purpose and goal or function which are identical among the different species. Another area of study and research is the behavioral evolution, which explores if behaviors can have a genetic basis. In plain words, how genes can affect behaviors. The behaviors exhibited by animals at any given time are influenced, among others, by the external environment. For example, the temperature, the weather conditions, the presence of other animals or humans, and generally all these factors and general specific characteristics of the environmental context. Their internal environment, the health, both body and mental, the body functions, and their physiological and psychological status. The time frequency, duration, and length of exposure to any given stimulus, their level of adaptivity, which can be affected by genetics and or prior learning, their coping behavior mechanism, and homeostasis. I would like to repeat here that the list of the factors is much bigger, as we could add more about the characteristics of the stimuli and the animal's identical characteristics and temperament. These are some examples of how animals try to maintain homeostasis. The term homeostasis describes the animal's organism self-regulating process to maintain stability while adjusting to conditions that are best for its survival. So in the photos, we can see a cat who is not feeling comfortable in the rain, a dog who should not be kept in a car, especially during hot weather conditions, a dog who is not confident to jump over an agility obstacle, and the horses who run on a race following the commands and handling delivered by the riders. When a clinical animal behaviorist is dealing with a behavior problem, they first have to identify the factors that are triggering this behavior. As part of it, they have to identify the predisposing factors and understand the process that initiated and maintained this behavior. This information is usually collected through observations and specially designed questionnaires that are provided to the pet owner or the animal keeper. These questionnaires try to gather information for a wide variety of areas related to the animal, the owner, and the environmental context. The next steps are the clinical animal behaviorist will diagnose the behavior problem and provide a behavior modification program and a training plan for the management, improvement, or cure of the problematic behavior. The clinical animal behaviorist will discuss with the owner or keeper the various challenges that they may come across during the application of the training plans. These challenges are very much affected by the animal's characteristics, abilities, temperament, adaptability, and of course, the severity of the problem. Moreover, the human lifestyle, daily routines, training skills, and the quality and quantity of their interaction with the animal, which also plays a very crucial role. Therefore, these challenges are both objective and subjective. In general, the whole intervention of the clinical animal behaviorist is targeting to promote one health, one welfare. Therefore, their approaches focus on the overall well-being of animals, humans, and their environments. Veterinary behaviorist and clinical animal behaviorist accreditation. The veterinarians can get specialized in animal behavior via the European College of Animal Welfare and Behavior Medicine, the European Society of Veterinary Clinical Ethology, and for the UK via the British Veterinary Behavior Association. For all others who are not veterinarians, they can get accredited only via the Animal Behavior and Training Council, which is based in the UK. In my knowledge, there is not any other European organization which provides such a robust and highly reputative scheme of accreditation. As far as the ABTC accreditation is concerned, it is worth mentioning that training and behavior is not yet regulated by the UK government. Therefore, the membership of ABTC is voluntarily. However, currently, ABTC is in discussions with the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, UKAS, which is the national accreditation service appointed by government to assess and accredit organizations that provide services including certification, testing, inspection, and calibration. As we can all understand, this is a great step forward. The ABTC has issued standards for the animal trainer, the animal trainer instructor, the animal trainer, the animal behavior technician, the clinical animal behaviorist, and the veterinary behaviorist roles. Today's presentation will cover the clinical animal behaviorist accreditation, but it is worth mentioning here that an animal behavior technician typically works with owners to provide preventative and/or first aid behavior advice to help address problem behaviors. Animal behavior technicians work with the owner or on implementing a behavior modification or an environmental plan that has been developed by a clinical animal behaviorist or a veterinary behaviorist. At this point, it should also be emphasized that the clinical animal behaviorist will work on veterinary referral. If you're a practitioner, then you can be added onto the appropriate register. And if you're a full member, only if you're a full member of one of the ABTC practitioner organizations. Practitioners who enter onto the ABTC registers are audited each year in respect of CPD, continuing professional development, and compliance with the ABTC Code of Professional Conduct. In this slide, you can see some ABTC practitioner organizations. In the following slides, I will give you information on how somebody can become an accredited registered clinical animal behaviorist via the APBC assessment route. Initially, the applicant needs to pay an application fee, which is covering the assessor's costs and the admin, certification, and financial payments. There is a cost difference between the APBC and the non-APBC members. For the knowledge and understanding assessment, the applicant will need to complete APL documents for clinical animal behaviorists, demonstrating how their courses, studies, and experiences have allowed them to achieve the knowledge and understanding set out in the ABTC standards through the APL process. The APL acronym stands for the Accreditation of Prior Experience and Learning. Or the applicant shall provide evidence of successful completion of an ABTC recognized clinical animal behavior course. In the APL form, the applicant needs to provide evidence and map how their knowledge and understanding meets the ABTC standard for clinical animal behaviors. The areas covered are animal behavior, animal health and welfare, animal learning and training, the interaction between health and behavior, clinical procedures, law and ethics, and critical analysis and research. This is how the form looks like. In the first column, you can read the ABTC criteria. In the following columns, the applicant provides evidence on how they meet this criteria. In the last column on your right, you will read reflective accounts form. So for each of these criteria, in the APL reflective accounts form, the applicant will need to answer the following questions. What was the nature of the learning? Why did you choose to undertake this learning? How is your learning relevant to the knowledge and understanding? Briefly provide specific examples of how this learning demonstrates your knowledge and understanding. How did this knowledge and understanding change or improve your practice? And this is how the APL reflective accounts form looks like. The applicants should have sufficient experience to be able to demonstrate competence and skills as set out by the performance criteria for clinical animal behaviorists. The APBC offers support through case discussion groups, assessment advisors, and CPD opportunities as you gain experience. Access to support is available through their website, www.apbc.org.uk, and the APBC office. Their email is info@apbc.org.uk. Moreover, the applicants should be able to demonstrate handling and training skills for the species they tend to work with. And the applicants will need to have been the lead practitioner in a wide variety and number of cases in order to appropriately demonstrate the breadth of experience and range of skills necessary for full membership as a clinical animal behaviorist. The applicant needs to submit 3 written behavior case records for assessment, videos of them working with a client or clients from one or more of these cases, including, of course, permission from the client or clients for this use, videos of them training animals and or coaching clients to train animals are also required. The evidence from their submission will be assessed by at least 2 assessors. Following successful submission of the written and video evidence, the applicant will be invited to attend oral interviews, usually up to 3. Questions will be based on the written case records and the video evidence they submitted. However, they may also be asked questions about unseen cases and scenarios. Aggression cases will be included in the interviews, and you will be assessed on your handling and training ability through video evidence, oral interview, and review of your techniques and methods when coaching clients and dealing with aggressive animals. After you finish your assessment, you will receive feedback and the result of your oral interviews within 1 week. This will include any required skills development in the event of an unsuccessful application. Before I finish, I would like to say that in the previous slides, I outlined the steps of clinical animal behaviorist accreditation via the Association of Pet Behavior Counselors route. The other ABDC practitioner organizations are following different procedures, so it is recommended you visit their websites or contact them for asking more information. That's it. Thank you very much for listening, and I will be more than happy to take your questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very much for Evangelus. Hope I'm pronouncing the name very well. So we are so excited that you had to share all that you shared with us, specifically on how one can actually get into being in this field. So we have some questions that was actually sent before now, and I had to go through the comment section to know if we have other questions, but I can't find at the moment. So I'll just read out some questions. So I'll begin with this. So the first question here for you. So this person wants to know, how do you, okay, first of all, let me relate it to what you talked about. So the first question is, what is the role of animal behaviorists in wildlife and environmental conservation? Probably this person is looking forward to getting into that. So I don't know if that is something you can lay emphasis on, just in case the person is on this call. Can you hear me, sir?
Sorry, can you repeat the
I think
question?
you're okay.
Can you please repeat the question, please?
Okay. All right. So the question is, what is the role of animal behaviorists in wildlife and environmental conservation? And what are the job opportunities in animal behavior? So the previous speakers had mentioned a few things on it, but I see the question repeating, so I felt that it was necessary to still ask.
I think that this is another area that animal behaviors have the opportunity to contribute so that to promote all these areas related to the environment. And a part of the environment actually is animals. So it's very important before we proceed and design any project or any plan or project in this area to have the input of an animal behaviorist who is going to discuss with us various aspects related to the interaction of this animal with the environment, other species, and all other factors which are affecting a healthy environment and a good welfare for this animal that we're talking about, or a collection of animals that can be there. So yes, I think that the contribution of animal behaviors in this area is really important. And as far as the opportunities, I think that every day we see how many people are discussing all these areas and how the public awareness should rise in terms of how we should think about our actions and how the human actions are affecting other animals and our environment. So yes, I think that definitely there is a space for animal behaviors there, and there are a lot of opportunities.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think Dr. Sunday is, I think he's back. Yes, I can see that he's back. So I'll just ask this question quickly, then he would continue from there. So this person is trying to find out that in the face of zoonosis, okay, so I think this person is interested in zoonosis. So the person is trying to understand that how would you manage therapeutic measures? So I'm trying to get the question exactly. Sorry, just a second. Okay, in the face of zoonosis, how do clients manage pets kept for therapeutic roles at home?
Well, I think that zoonosis and anthrazoonosis, it's not my area of specialization. Okay. I think that a veterinarian is a person who should provide information about this very important area. And I think that, yes, definitely we need a veterinarian who should give us the exact information about how this factor is affecting either human and animal well-being and health, of course.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. Okay, for time factor, Dr. Sunday will come in right away to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Sorry, my internet has been all over the place today. I just don't know why. But then let me just, so someone was asking, to probably just give one more question and all. Someone was asking for training. I don't know if that has been talked about. So basically, maybe just share some light, and especially on training as pertains to animals and how one can be, or let me even ask the question that we did try to do. So someone asking about training and wanting to know what is positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement in training.
Actually, this is a very, very big topic. And just to let you know that in this area, I'm having at least 3 to 4 weeks sessions with my students to explain the difference and what is hidden behind each of these terms that we call positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. So generally speaking, I could very briefly say that the human societies are heading towards a direction that I said previously, we very much care about the animal's well-being. So it's not just having an obedient dog, but we want to have a happy, obedient dog. And this can only be achieved with methods which are based on reward and not punishment. So this is what we're talking about. Actually, we're talking about physical punishment. So yes, I am against any kind of punishment, physical punishment. However, if we want to be realistic, we can never avoid applying various forms of physical punishment because, for example, I could very briefly tell you that only the fact that we're using a lead that we restrain the dog's movement and a collar, and we have our dogs in our houses instead of having them outside in the streets, that I know that this is not realistic. These are forms of physical punishment as we restrain the animal actions. However, as I told you, it's very important we have humane methods of training and approaches and try to balance what is, first of all, the animal's interest in terms of health and welfare, and then see how we can create an harmonic environment and have a really good relationship with our companions, because now we all regard dogs, cats, and other pets are companions. But as I told you, this is a very, very big topic, and we cannot explain what is positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and all these terms within minutes.
Sorry, we apologize for the network. So I think the same thing just happened to me and I got kicked out. We apologize for that. Okay, so I think we'll just have to quickly move to the next speaker. And I think I can see Dr. Betts already here. So thank you very much. Welcome, Ma. Okay, so I'll be going through her bio so she can come up immediately. Sorry, we apologize once again. The network in Nigeria can just be very funny at some point. So sorry. So I can just get to her bio quickly. Okay, welcome back, Dr. Sunday. Okay, Dr. Betts Ventura is a senior lecturer in animal behavior and welfare at the University of Lincoln, United Kingdom. Originally from the United States, Betts worked primarily in Canada and the US before relocating to England in 2022. Prior to her current role, she served as teaching associate professor at the University of Minnesota, where she developed and taught courses on animal welfare, applied ethology, and human-animal interactions for thousands of students. Her research interests encompass both the animal and human side of animal welfare, and she has worked with farm animals, horses, and captive wild animals, investigating topics including environmental enrichment, pain, and more recently, cognition. The core of our research program, however, addresses the human-level factors that influence animal welfare. She sits on the Ethics Committee of the International Society for Applied Ethology. She's a member of the American Dairy Science Association and is an associate editor for the Journal of Applied Animal Welfare Science. Beth also co-founded and facilitates the Animal Welfare Education Community of Practice, a grassroots community for those interested in teaching applied ethology and welfare, and which now serves over 100 members based in 60+ institutions around the world. So those interested in joining are invited to email her via, so we will be sharing her mail just in case you're interested. So let's make welcome Dr. Beth Ventura. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Just want to check, can everyone hear me all right? Or can at least somebody hear me okay? Yep, okay, thanks, Alan. All
Yes,
right,
we can hear you.
perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And just confirming, can everyone see the screen and only the screen?
Yes, please.
Beautiful. Okay. Thanks very much. Just like all of the other speakers have indicated, I'm really honored to be here. So thank you so much to Sunday and to the rest of the organizers of this wonderful meeting. I'm very pleased to be here today. And so what I was asked to talk about today was a little bit more kind of building off the themes of what some of the questions have asked about what kind of opportunities there are to get into a career involving animal behavior and animal animal welfare. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. For some people here, this may be a little bit repeat information, but hopefully for a number of people, this will be useful information. Certainly information that I would have been very happy to get when I was at the start, or even somewhere further along in my journey to the career that I am in now. So what I was going to talk about today was kind of three areas. First, and this has already been highlighted a bit throughout today, but I just wanted to tap briefly into the various kind of scholarly disciplines around animal behavior and animal welfare, because depending on what your particular interests are, you might find a better home in one of these areas more so than others. But there's also a lot of overlap between these different disciplines. And so I will be talking, because my background has been primarily in research, university and academic institutions, and because my background has been primarily in North America, both in Canada and the US, and I've only recently started working in the United Kingdom. A lot of my experiences are kind of from that perspective. So I am a little bit limited, but I'll try to do my best presenting on a global scale. So I was going to talk about some of these disciplines, and then I was going to go through what kinds of opportunities there may be out there if you're interested in working in animal behavior or welfare as a career, depending on what kinds of animals you find yourselves drawn to. And as I will kind of note, it doesn't really matter what animals you're interested in working with. I think there are wonderful opportunities and lots of work to do, no matter the animals that you're interested in. And then I'm going to highlight a little bit more in detail about some of the, about some of the journeys that you might consider if you are interested in a research and or teaching career within an academic institution, because again, I can only speak to, what my background is and what kind of lessons I've learned from that along the way. So I'll start with disciplines involving ABW, or animal behavior and welfare. So most probably familiar to myself and to maybe some of the other speakers from today is the disciplines that kind of overlap with relation to behavior and welfare. And so that's applied ethology, or applied animal behavior, and animal welfare science. And I kind of see these as really overlapping disciplines. It's most common, if you're interested in this discipline, you're probably interested in working with animals that are under human control in some fashion. So all of our domesticated species would be a good fit under applied ethology and animal welfare science, either because we manage them in some respect, whether on a farm or in the home or in various other contexts, or we're working with managed animals who are wild, but are still kind of under human control. So in a zoo institution, for example. So the most common, or not most common, but some of the organizations that you should be aware of, and we've already talked about them today. Some of our other speakers have already talked about this, but the International Society for Applied Ethology, or ISAE, is definitely an organization that you should familiarize yourself with, and we have regional representations throughout the world, no matter what region you are in. And people can join this as students or as professionals, whether you're employed or not yet employed, you can still join. And kind of similarly to this is if you're more interested in animal welfare science, but not necessarily interested in behavior per se, you might start looking into UFAW, or the University's Federation for Animal Welfare. And then when it comes to looking to where the research gets published, there are a lot of journals. Some of them are, well, we all have our own opinions about what are the best journals to publish in, and it's kind of tricky to navigate, but some of the organization journals include Animal Welfare, Applied Animal Behavior Science, or Journal for Applied Animal Welfare Science are 3, but there are many, many more. So if you find yourself not as passionate about the behavior and the welfare of domesticated animals, and you're interested more in kind of pure animal behavior, you may focus on that with through a number of different organizations and activities. So we have also talked about the Association for the Study of Animal Behavior, or ASAB. That's the organization that's kind of sat through the United Kingdom. If you are in North America, the kind of companion society, or competing society perhaps, is the Animal Behavior Society. And the journals, there's a lot of different affiliated journals, but that could include Animal Behavior, the Journal of Animal Behavior. Oh, just one moment, please. Excuse me, I thought I was going to sneeze. So finally, there's also kind of overlapping the kind of pure pursuit of animal behavior, or the applied pursuit of animal behavior and welfare. are disciplines involving anthrozoology or human-animal interactions. So this is really focused on the interaction and how humans impact animals and vice versa, how animals impact humans. So again, there's lots of different professional societies that focus in this area that you might consider looking up. So the International Society for Anthrozoology, or ISAZ, would be an example of this. Another example is the International Association of Human-Animal Interaction, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that acronym. And again, there's many scholarly journals that you might find research published in, including a very prominent one would be Anthrozoas. So there's lots of different disciplines, and we work together and kind of, we don't just sit necessarily in one of these disciplines if we are researchers in behavior and or welfare, but these would be kind of the common ones. Okay, so species considerations. If you're someone who is at the start of your career or even midway through, something that I have always advised my students is to be open to the types of animals that you are getting experience with, whether you're getting experience in maybe cattle or chickens, but you're really passionate about dogs, or vice versa. If you're really passionate about dogs and you're trying to really focus in on just working with dogs, I would consider any animal experience and working with any animal to be really valuable experience as you're building your portfolio, because a lot of times those skills translate, but I'll speak more to that in just a moment. When it comes to the types of jobs that you might get working in animal behavior and welfare, on one level, the jobs kind of permeate across different contexts. So there are people working in animal behavior and welfare in academia and in research, in teaching, in government types of organizations, or in nonprofit type of organizations. People are working in this field without getting anything beyond a bachelor's degree, but other people are working with a master's degree or going all the way through and getting a PhD. You don't necessarily need to get all of those degrees in order to work in animal behavior and welfare. And again, you don't have to work with certain species, again, to get a career. But at the same time, there are different types of opportunities that may be available to you depending on the types of animals that you are working with or you're interested in working with. So probably just based on the numbers, I would hazard a guess to say that there are the most opportunities, especially, I don't know, maybe the other panelists will disagree with me. So please feel free to chime in with your thoughts. But at least where I have, my journey has taken me, it seems that livestock is a really good place to get started or to work, both because of the billions of farmed animals that we raise every year on the planet. There's always livestock, regardless of what particular region you're in. And there's just a whole lot of need to work with the behavior and to improve the welfare of livestock. Not to say that there isn't also that need for the other species. Here is a very incomplete list. I'm just going to go through some of the possibilities for where you might find career opportunity. If you're interested, for example, in working with livestock, whether that is cattle or other ruminant animals like sheep, or as Dr. McElliott beautifully shared, all of the wonderful things that we're learning about some of these creatures, including goats. I like to say goats and sheep are as smart as they need to be, and they are usually much more intelligent than humans give them credit for, which research by Dr. McElliott has pointed out in spades. Anyway, okay, so in the livestock sectors, if you are actually interested in working directly with the industries, there are different organizations by livestock species. So there are dairy cattle organizations, and to a lesser extent, dairy goat and dairy sheep organizations. There are poultry organizations, whether they're for meat or for eggs, or if they're hybrid. There are swine organizations, et cetera, et cetera. So regardless of what particular animal you're interested in, there are industry bodies that hire increasingly people who are trained in behavior and welfare to address the kind of rising societal and ethical concerns about management of these animals for human consumption. There are also very specific companies, and again, they're kind of spread throughout the world. I'm not going to go into them in any great detail for now. There's also privately owned companies that work in the health and pharmaceutical field, creating pain medication or, disease medications, you know what I mean? There's animal nutrition companies. There are global food companies or food purchasers. So a great example you might think of, obviously, like McDonald's or Burger King. Any of the major food distributors will increasingly have animal behavior and or welfare consultants on their staff. Even organizations that you may not think, at the top of your head, also hire animal welfare scientists, although, again, this depends on kind of where and when you're looking for jobs. But a great example of this is I have a colleague of mine who is a dairy cattle welfare scientist by training, and she now works for IKEA. And you might not think immediately that IKEA, the furniture company, would need any animal welfare scientists. But it turns out they are one of the top food purchasers in the world. Just think of all of their cafes and all of those meatballs that they produce. And so they also have a need for sustainability experts, including people who work in animal welfare. At the national level, or even at the regional level, all of increasingly the supermarket chains, the grocery chains. This is especially the case in the UK and in Europe and in North America. I'm not as aware myself of other organizations, but that's only because I haven't worked in those regions. So others from those regions will probably know. In government, you can work in welfare assessment or welfare auditing at the farm level or at the point of transport and or slaughter. Obviously in academia, in research and or teaching, or in research institutes, in nonprofits. So there are very many international organizations for animal welfare. A very incomplete list. I've just highlighted a few of them now, but World Animal Protection, Universities Federation for Animal Welfare, or IFAW, which is, I can't remember off the top of my head. If anybody remembers, Alan, if you remember what IFAW stands for, or soon, if you could remember, can you type that in to the chat for me? You can work again for not directly for the industries, but for auditing or assessments, third-party organizations that go and check and verify if there's kind of a higher level of welfare for certain farms who want to subscribe to a higher set of standards than maybe is the norm in the region. So in the US, for example, a good example is Certified Humane or Animal Welfare Approved. In the UK, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or the RSPCA, could be a good example of that. If you are someone who's interested in pursuing a veterinary degree, veterinarians, I think probably everybody here who's on the panel will confirm how closely we end up working with veterinarians in some of our work, either as research or as people working directly on the ground with different farms, for example. And also, you can be involved directly with working with livestock as an animal care technician or as a farm worker or a farm manager. This is, again, a very incomplete list, but just some of the types of opportunities and the types of sectors that you could find careers in. You're interested in companion animals. So whether it's dogs or cats, or kind of depending on where you are, the list continues into more exotic creatures that may or may not be domesticated. But at an international and at a national level, pets are big business. And there is a space for animal behavior and welfare scientists to work for the pet sector in some capacity. So if you are, there are jobs, for example, at pet food companies or pet pharmaceutical companies or pet nutrition companies like Nestle Purina. There's opportunities in governments, perhaps working to uphold anti-cruelty laws and enforce different regulations depending on the country that you're in. Again, there are opportunities within academia, either as a researcher or as a teacher, or both, or at non-academic research institutions. So for example, I always like to talk about her because she just impresses me so much, but I have a colleague who just recently finished her PhD in Canada, and she is now a certified PhD in kitten behavior, which I find amazing. You can also, there are plentiful nonprofits and charities in different countries related to the protection and the upkeep of the welfare of companion pets. So societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals in various countries would be a really good example of this, but there are many, many others. Similarly, in kind of working alongside nonprofits or charities are animal shelters or animal rescues. Dr. McElliott talked about the Buttercup Sanctuary, which was not necessarily for dogs or cats, but for goats in this situation. But there are plentiful around the world for obviously the more kind of dogs and cats and bunnies and birds and that sort of thing. You can also, increasingly, we are seeing this connection between human and animal health and emotional and mental well-being. Dogs and to some extent other species are increasingly relied on as therapy or as service and assistance animals. And there are people that need to help produce these dogs and train them. So a huge need for skilled and talented people in this regard. There are people that endeavor, that as our previous speaker talked about, get very into behavior training and to consultancy, and there are wonderful accreditation programs to ensure that you are doing evidence-based scientific training principles. Again, if you're interested in veterinary medicine, you can work either side by side with veterinarians, or you can become a veterinary behaviorist yourself if you choose to pursue that route. Again, there's animal care technicians. There are pet services, depending on what country you're in, involved in anything from grooming and boarding of people's pets to walking them, to exercising them, to rehabilitating them. If you're interested in horses or equids, again, these types of opportunities are kind of the same. There's opportunities in government, in academia, in nonprofits. So I believe we were talking earlier about the Brook, which is one example of an institution that focuses directly on equid welfare. Others include SPANA or the Gambia Horse and Donkey Trust. There's also more regional ones. So those are some examples of international organizations, but there's of course regional and national organizations working to promote the welfare of horses, whether they are race horses or working horses or just the common kind of pleasure horse, depending on where you are. Just as with the pet sector, with kind of dogs being used as service animals, a growing area is in the use of horses for rehabilitation of people as well, or equine assisted therapy, basically. So if you're someone who loves working with horses in vulnerable communities of people, this might be a really good area. Again, with people who are specialized in behavior and training. There are opportunities in training of horses and consultancy and behavior modification as well with the horse community. You can work in boarding or riding or training schools for horses. If you're interested in working directly with the animals day by day, again, animal care and husbandry as a groom or as a stable hand, even as you work your way up, or for some folks, this is just the perfect life, or be as a stable or a farm supervisor, or again, in veterinary medicine. So those are the three kind of sectors that I think most people think of most readily when we talk about the application of animal behavior and welfare science to improving the lives of animals in a career. But there's also a couple of other sectors that I like to make sure that nobody forgets about. And the first is the animals that are used to help facilitate science, the research animals. So those that are in laboratories around the world, whether they're used for biomedical research, for psychology research, for animal behavior and welfare and cognition research. There are millions and millions of animals in laboratories, and there are people that need to ensure their care and well-being. So you could work, for example, in these sectors, in the industry or in contract research organizations. So in, companies like Covance or Elanco or Charles River, these are international organizations that hire behavior and welfare professionals. Again, there's opportunities within academia. Depending on where you are in the world, every institution conducting research should have some version of an institutional animal care and use committee. And there are people that work on those committees. Some of them are volunteers, but others work directly and are employed to sit on those committees and to oversee the ethics of research using animals. You can again work for government, whether depending again on the particular institution that you are in. You can again work for a nonprofit or charities. So examples of this would be the Association for the Assessment and an Accreditation of Laboratory Animal Care, or the 3 R's collaboratives. There are many more. Or you can work directly with the laboratory animals, just like you can work directly with pets or with horses or with farm animals. So either as a care and research technician, as someone who specializes in the enrichment of these animals, or as the managers of the facilities that house them. And again, veterinary medicine also kind of interacts with these as well. Then finally, if you're interested in wild animals and you're interested in their behavior or their welfare, as someone who is within the applied behavior and welfare world, I mostly work with these animals, not in the wild. So I don't conduct field research myself, but I supervise students who work to study the behavior and the welfare of animals that are held within zoos. So if you're someone who's interested in this, the zoos and aquariums around the world need keepers, they need curators, sometimes curators specifically for animal behavior and welfare that actually oversee the management of the well-being of those animals. Again, you can work in academia. Depending on your particular interests, this may or may not involve actual research out into the field where you're out in nature studying the animals. Again, you can work in government or in nonprofits, in wildlife rescue and rehabilitation. And again, you work often with veterinarians. So that was kind of a huge laundry list and an overall buffet tour, I think, of some of the different opportunities that exist. It is not exhaustive. There are many, many more opportunities. But I was going to just spend the last kind of moments, not the last moments, but the last kind of section of this talk, sharing a bit about my journey into the world of animal welfare as someone who has only worked or mostly worked within academia at different universities in North America and then now recently in the UK. So if you are someone who's interested and passionate about pursuing an academic career in animal behavior and welfare, or just kind of wondering what it's like, hopefully these next few minutes will be a little bit helpful. So I thought I'd share a little bit about, if you are someone who's considering academia, what it looks like on a day-to-day. And the first thing is that it does look kind of different day to day, but generally, a lot of my life and a lot of the lives of the people that I work with doesn't involve a whole bunch every day of me being with the animals. A lot of the time I'm at my desk, or at least on a computer, dealing with emails, a lot of emails, more emails than I thought I would be dealing with. As someone, as you get into it, you get more emails. So if you're someone who doesn't like emails, or at least can't cope with them, just be aware of that. I spend a lot of my time on meetings, either in person or online, so on Zoom or on Teams. Because I teach and because I supervise students, I spend a lot of time just talking with students and working with students. I spend a lot of time marking or grading their work because I teach classes. I serve on university committees, so that involves a lot of emails and, again, meetings. I spend time writing grant proposals to hopefully get money so that I can do the research that I'm interested in, or I spend time writing papers on the research that I have done. So there's a lot of writing in my job, and there's a lot of editing. So editing, for example, or giving feedback to my students who are in the stages of becoming researchers themselves, and they are researchers. They're just at the start of their research career. I spend a good chunk of my time actually teaching and facing students, either in the classroom, in the field sometimes. That's obviously for me the most fun when we're actually working with animals. And depending on the class, some of my teaching is online. So I've had to get a lot of online technical skills related to teaching in an online virtual environment. COVID certainly helped me develop those skills, along with probably everybody else. And then the projects that I do, I'm supposed to be working on them 40% of the time, but in reality, that's not always the case. And when I'm actually working with animals, that usually involves data collection. Sometimes that involves really quality animal time, and sometimes it really is that cute. So I do get to work with baby animals, which I enjoy quite a lot. But it's a very slim amount of time. More of the time is teaching or on the computer. So just making that very clear. So as people develop their academic skills, I think it's important to kind of keep in mind that all of us, we're juggling a lot of plates, and it becomes really important to start managing time really well, because you are involved probably, if you're an academic in animal behavior and welfare, you're probably doing some amount of research, not always though. Sometimes people don't do any research. You're probably doing some amount of teaching. Again, not always. Maybe you're not doing much teaching. You're probably doing some amount of community engagement with either your local community or the international community, the different stakeholders that are affected by the type of research that you do. You're probably needing to be involved in some degree of service to your institution and to your profession, and also needing to take on different types of leadership roles. And you're also dealing with a lot of administration on the back end. So administration underlying research and teaching and service and community engagement. So the stuff that doesn't really show up, but you're still needing to do that in order to get done all of the other core things in your role. And to juggle these things, I think it's really important. And obviously, this is advice that is best suited for people just at the early stages of their careers. But also maybe if you're at a later stage of your life, it's good reminders, and something I have to remind myself of. But developing a strategy to manage your tasks and getting your goals set out is, I think, a really important thing to help foster your success. I think it's also really important to, if you are doing research, that you need to make time for yourself, maybe daily, maybe at least a few times a week, to stay on top of the literature and keep reading those papers so you know what's happening in your field, and make dates for yourself to write, because juggling all of these kind of roles, especially with regards to administration, there's always stuff to do, and you could always do something else other than writing, but you need to be writing if you're someone who is wanting to contribute as a researcher in animal behavior and welfare. When you are early in your career, I think it's a really good idea. People will reach out to you for to collaborate on projects or to serve on committees. And so I think it's a really good idea early on to say yes to opportunities as they come your way. But you need to also learn to say no when your plate has become full or overly full, because if you say yes to everything, at one point you're not going to be able to execute the things that you're supposed to do. And I am working on that myself every day, and I'm very bad at it, realistically. It's also, I think, really important as you build your portfolio to help strengthen your ability to get promoted or to get new jobs in other locations that maybe you're really interested in, or to work with groups that you've always wanted to work with. Document what you do. Document everything. Write it down, have kind of lists that you maintain so that you can keep track of the talks that you give, the workshops that you attend, the small things that you write that may or may not be published. All of these things, document what you do. And remember that depending on where you are, I think there obviously in academia, there's a bit of a hustle culture, where you have to there's like all of these external pressures to publish and get grants and get all these grants. Yes, that's important, but it's also really important to balance yourself so that the things that you are doing are quality. And so, I mean, for some people, quality means publishing in a 4-star paper according to the United Kingdom's REF, Research Excellence Framework. So like a paper published in Science or Nature. For other people, quality is measured differently, and it might be actually impacting the lives of the animals that you are trying to research. But that might not be in a 4-star paper. It might be in you've changed and helped one farmer shift their practice with regards to feeding or something like that. I think it's also really important to build relationships with people, to build relationships with your peers, the people who are, in those classes with you or in that research group with you, but also to build them with your colleagues and your mentors, because science, for the most part, animal welfare and welfare science included, it doesn't take place in a vacuum. It's not something you do by yourself. It's something you do with the team. So team skills and relationship skills and communication skills are really important. So like above all else, like be nice to people. Just be good to people, I think is just a good tip. Academia might be something that you are suited to, and would be a good fit for who you are. If you are someone who has really good time management skills, if you have strong self-initiative, so you don't wait to be told things, you just get on with it and know how to ask questions and have no problem asking questions if you don't know what to do. If you're someone who is creative and really good at solving problems, if you have good analytical skills with regards to processing the data that you collect as a researcher, whether that is a quantitative data skill set, or maybe a qualitative one. So a lot of the research that I do actually doesn't involve numbers at all. I don't need to do, complex statistics on some of the data that I collect. What I do is I talk to people a lot, and I understand, as Dr. McElligott was saying, I'm really interested in people's attitudes about animals and how that informs what they do and why they do it. And in order to answer those questions, I have to talk to people, and the data that we get is words. And so it's a whole other skill set to qualitatively analyze that kind of data. So you don't have to be someone who's good with numbers to be a good researcher, but you do have to be someone who is good with processing your data, depending on what kind of data that you do collect. You need to be someone with strong communication skills. And I think that is strong communication skills on a few levels. One, with your writing. Two, with your oral communication, your spoken communication. And then three, even with your visual communication. So oftentimes when it comes to outreach and sharing about your research, you're doing presentations, or you're creating social media posts, or you're maybe creating infographics or research posters. And those are dissemination techniques that take place often over visual media. And so don't underestimate, if you're someone who is who processes things visually, your skills are definitely needed. You need good interpersonal skills, because as I mentioned, science doesn't take place in a vacuum. I think one of the most important things is you need to be passionate for the field. You need to be passionate about animals, and improving their welfare, and understanding why they do the things they do, and how we can use that knowledge to improve their lives, but also the lives of the people that rely on them. I think none of us are in animal behavior and welfare because we want to be rich. We're in it because we care about our work. And so if you're not passionate about it, I would say find something else, because it's what drives a lot of us, I think, and makes it worth it, and why we come back to it every day. And then in addition to being passionate for why you do what you do, I think you need to also be passionate for yourself. And I articulate that in terms of, you need to protect yourself, and you need to be good to yourself. So the ability to carve out boundaries for yourself, especially in academia, but also probably in any kind of work that you do. Protecting your ability to also live your life and your own mental health is really, really important, because a career in academia can feel like a sprint, but it is a marathon. And people need endurance. And I think for a lot of folks, that endurance comes only if you are protecting yourself and your mental health. So take the time, say no, take a holiday. If you're allowed to take a holiday, you should take a holiday. And I was just wanting to leave with a few recommendations for maximizing your success if you are interested in academia. The first is that I think folks should seek any opportunity to work with animals and to work in a research environment, in laboratories or on research projects, regardless of the species, because those lessons often translate and those skills translate. There are lots of places to look. So Soon and Alan did a wonderful job of highlighting some of those examples. The International Society for Applied Ethology, for example, maintains a list of employment opportunities and graduate study fellowships or internship opportunities. So I would recommend regularly checking that. Similar professional organizations also have those kind of lists. Seek professional accreditations where relevant. Our previous speaker did a beautiful job of speaking to some of that. So whether it's International Association of Applied Animal Behavior Consultants or ITBC, or I think ATBC, I'm blurring that acronym, my apologies. In the US, if you're interested in becoming a professional auditor, you can apply to be recognized through PACO. There are lots of them. It just depends on what you're interested in. As I mentioned, be open to working with diverse species. I have some pictures of some of the animals that I've had the privilege to work with in my career. You can see a lot of domesticated farmed animals because I have a passion for them. But I also have gotten the chance to work with more exotic animals as well. And that's because, and I think that's partially because I didn't kind of drill down into only one animal and only look for opportunities with one animal. I think being open to diverse species has opened up doors for me. And I think it can do for other people as well. And then finally, develop your network. So if you're not already, you should be on LinkedIn. If you're interested in the research side of things, you might consider at least joining ResearchGate. And this is kind of like a social media where people share their research outputs. And so it's a good way to stay on top of what some of the research is. Twitter is actually a really active space in the animal behavior and welfare community. You don't necessarily have to create an account for yourself, but if you did, you would be able to follow a lot of people. I have learned so much through my social media networks from other scientists, from other veterinarians and animal behavior professionals. I've gotten to know people through social media that I would never have had a chance to know. So it's wonderful because you're not limited by region. You just need an internet connection, and you can meet people. And I think that's meeting people is the most important thing. If you're not someone who's into Twitter, Mastodon is kind of an alternative social network. It's less used, but it's also an option. And so I wanted to end. I created for my students, so it's a little bit US focused, and I have a kind of a companion one for United Kingdom. But I created a resource guide that I wanted to give to my students as kind of a compilation of advice about where to start looking and how to start thinking about behavior and welfare careers. And so I will link that in the chat for folks, and hopefully you find it useful. But with that, I'd like to say thank you so much again for having me, and excuse me, I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Beth, for your presentation. I'm glad I'm back now. So thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you so much for the helpful hints, advice, and all of that you did give. And for everyone who's on the call, there's a lot that has been happening in the chat section as well. A lot of useful links and everything have been coming in. Dr. Alan has especially been very resourceful with all of that. So please make good use of whatever resources that you can get from the presentations, from the chat, as much as we can. I don't know if my going out and in and all would allow me to accurately access the chat, but if I can, I would also have that sent out to all the participants. So let me probably go to the questions. So I don't know if we have any questions. If you do have any questions, please type in the chat box or maybe raise your hand and we could probably give you the opportunity to this thing. But then for now, we'll probably go to the pre-conference questions that people did send in to take questions from there while waiting to see if there's any other question that comes on live. So one question here that someone did ask earlier, so the person asked to know how animal behavior affects humans. So that's like, how does animal behavior affect humans?
Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful question. I think I might kind of flip it and say, how does animal behavior not affect humans? So in my view, animal behavior, like unless, even if you live in a city and you never see animals on a day-to-day, you're still affected by animal behavior. If you're someone who eats animals, we're affected by animal behavior because the behavior of the animals that we raise for food, it impacts everything. If we're a farmer and we don't have good knowledge of the behavior of our animals, we're probably at more risk of physical injury, depending on the animals. That maybe not so much like a chicken, although maybe depends on the chicken. I've met some really scary roosters. But if we're working with larger animals, good knowledge of how they move and why they move and how we can move them safely is imperative for our health, but also and safety, but also theirs. Knowledge of their behavior helps us move them and work with them in a low stress manner, which improves their welfare, but can also have correlations with their production and their performance indicators, whether it's their milk production or whether it's their rate of gain and their growth. Keeping them calm and stress-free before slaughter requires that we understand how to move them in accordance with, again, their behavioral needs. Which is also why it's so important to understand their cognitive capacities, because understanding, as Dr. McElliott said, how they perceive the world and how they process it is a core piece of information that we need to understand what they need, what kind of housing they need, how they perceive us, and how we work with them. From a farm animal standpoint, we need to understand their behavior so that we can raise them in a humane way and get the most out of them that we can from a production standpoint as well. So I could keep going in each of these different contexts, but behavior, knowing their behavior keeps us safer and it keeps them happier and more healthy. And then we get more out of them when they are happier and healthier.
True, totally agreed. Thank you so much for that answer. So another question. Okay, someone is raising his hand. YD, let me probably just give YD the opportunity to listen. Let's see if. So YD, you've been unmuted. Please go ahead to ask a question if you do have a question.
Okay, hello, Beth.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for the lecture. I came in a little bit late, but then I enjoyed so much of the parts that I heard. So thank you so much for bringing on so much information at this very right time. Well, I'm a researcher and I'm quite interested in animal behavior really because I want to know if from the point of research, I usually do use either rabbit, rat, and sometimes dog for my research. So I want to know if their behavior, quote unquote, can actually create a bias to end result, as it were. I just want to know that if they are, perhaps, for example, we use control animals, and then perhaps the animals that have been maybe intubated or the rest like that. So should animal behavior, as it were, be considered as a source of bias to scientific research? That's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I understand it, you're asking if the state of the animal's behavior, and maybe I'll expand it also to their welfare, if that impacts research results. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah. Yes, Beth.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I would say yes, absolutely. And there's some. I've not produced the research myself, but I am aware of a number of really excellent and insightful papers who have, for example, made the case that researching on animals that are perhaps in a state of chronic stress or are housed in ways that alter their behavior, so they are not behaviorally normal compared to like what they would be in the wild or under a lot more permissive environments where they don't have the opportunity to kind of express the full suite of behaviors that they are motivated to do. Those behaviors are not the norm, or excuse me, those animals are not the norm. And so the results, the research that we get from them, it kind of the external validity of those research findings is compromised, or it might be compromised. I can look, for example, for some interesting papers and drop some of those in the chat, because again, I'm not an expert in this area, but I am aware that that researching animals that are stressed, for example, produces different types of results compared to if they are not so much stressed.
Okay, thank you very much. So take a few questions from the pre-conference questions as well, maybe just 2 quick questions. So one, we had a number of people asking about scholarship opportunities in UK, Europe, North America, as relates to animal behavior and welfare. So I don't know if you have information about that. We did have a ton of people that asked about that. So let me throw that out at this point.
Yeah, so scholarship opportunities in North America and the UK, they're a little different depending on where you're looking, and they'll probably be different institution by institution. In Canada and in the United States, if you're interested in, for example, pursuing a master's degree and or a PhD in animal behavior and welfare, I would suggest the resource guide that I linked earlier has a very incomplete list, very incomplete. So don't just rely on that. Okay, it's only from out of my brain and a number of colleagues, so it's a living document. But it has an incomplete list of institutions that may contain either individual researchers or research groups who do animal behavior and or welfare research. It's a little bit difficult to actually find opportunities just by Googling, although you can just do that. But if you go kind of through these institutions and these websites, individual researchers or research groups may post on their websites if they are trying to recruit or looking for new students, new master's students or new PhD students. These positions may or may not be funded. I've always kind of told my students when I was in the US that if you're interested in pursuing a master's degree where you're doing like a 2-year research project, basically, and if you're going to do a PhD, if you did it through probably Canada and the US at least, you should be paid to do it because you're producing research and you're learning how to produce research. And so there are paid like fellowship positions or research assistant positions or teaching assistant positions. But sometimes that information is quite difficult to like figure out, but a good start is to look at the different, each institution, kind of institution by institution, and look to see what their policies are, who their people are, and if their people are posting, hey, I am looking for, you know, a person right now. Or maybe if they're not, they may say on their website, I don't have any positions right now available, but at least you can kind of go through that. In the UK, it's a little different. And actually, Alan may be able to speak to this to a better degree than me because he spent a lot more time in the UK than I did, than I have. I can speak for my institution, but more broadly, yeah. Alan, do you want to mention anything about UK?
Hi, Beth. When it comes to masters in the UK, they're generally not funded, so it's a bit of a struggle. So maybe masters in North America, USA or Canada are better if some can get funded. There are occasional scholarships available for students with the top grades, but generally people have to pay for them. And also, I think, to be honest, since Brexit, I think UK has become even more complicated. So you may even be more likely to find a funded master's in the Netherlands or Germany or Austria or somewhere like that, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay. That resonates with what I've learned as well. So yeah, I would also very much recommend looking to the professional societies, because often members of professional societies like ASAB and like ISAE will often let the organizations know that they have an open position that's funded, like, oh, I'm looking for a master's student to work on this particular project. And then you can kind of follow those directions. So yeah, like go on social media and just kind of check it every day. And there are funded opportunities. They are competitive. And I do think that there's both rising opportunities, but there's also rising interest. So it kind of continues, but you should go for it.
Sorry, can I add to that?
Yes,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Please.
Yes, I would like to implore all the participants to try to be on Twitter or LinkedIn. There are lots of opportunities that are advertised on those platforms. Please, you'll get a lot of opportunities there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Maybe let me just mention two things I know currently about, or two scholarship opportunities that I know about for masters, especially in the UK. So I know that there is the Commonwealth Scholarship, which usually comes up every year. I think it's usually in honor of the late Queen. And for that, it depends on what part of the world you are, but if you are from a Commonwealth nation, then that is a scholarship opportunity that does come up every year, that if you do apply for, you could use that to get a master's in the UK. Another that I do know about is the Erasmus Mundus Scholarship. But I know that the Erasmus Scholarship does not have, I had literally tried to check it like very detailed and all of that before to see if one could get a master's in animal behavior through it. But the closest thing that comes to animal behavior through the Erasmus Mundus Scholarship is a scholarship to study a master's in animal genetics. And the Erasmus Scholarship is structured such that you're doing your scholarship, your research and coursework in usually at least 2 countries, 2 to 3 European countries. So that's usually like UK, Netherlands, and all of those. So those are 2 things I know that currently are out there. So one last question, Beth, and that would be to ask, someone asked, how can extremely stressed fish recover speedily?
How can extremely stressed fish recover?
How can you help extremely stressed fish to recover speedily?
So that's a great question, and it's a very important one. But as someone who has never researched fish, I may not be the best person to answer that. I'm sorry.
Maybe I need to jump in.
Yes, please, rescue me.
I think yesterday we had the Animal Welfare Group Nigeria, and a lady presented on fish welfare, and this same question was asked. And her response was that you should try to make the water, is it aerated enough so that the fish can easily, recover from whatever stress that it has gone through. That was the response she gave. I think Alan wants to add to this.
Thank you so much. Yes.
If I can give a quick word, like the other 2 speakers, I don't work on fish either, but I do have to give a fish welfare lecture, or 2 hours of a lecture, to first-year vets. And my go-to person for fish welfare is Dr. Lynn Snedden. She's one of the top experts in the world. She is British, Scottish, used to be in the UK, now she's based at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. You can also find her on Twitter, and she is one of the leading researchers who has worked on aspects of fish welfare, fish pain perception, things like that. I put her website or a link to Lynn, but if you look her up on Twitter or LinkedIn, you will find her as well.
I think we have a fish expert too here, Said Sabiet. He works on fish. If he's available, he can shed light on this.
Okay,
He's part of us today. So Said, if you want to help us.
Let me unmute Said.
Yeah, Said, yes.
Trying to, okay.
Said Sabiet.
Saw him, So what happened? He was okay, so suddenly I can't see him anymore. I saw him, I was trying to ask him to unmute, but I suddenly cannot find him anymore.
He's still there, Said.
Okay, yes. Okay, I don't know what keeps happening. Anyway, so trying to unmute him, but somehow, some way, I keep not. Let me see if this helps. So,
Maybe he's not with the phone or with where his system is.
okay, so I've unmuted Sahid. So Sahid, please. He keeps coming off and on. I think his network is. So maybe we'll just go ahead. And so there were a number of questions asked about, okay, Samuel is raising his hand. Let me probably just quickly give Samuel the opportunity to speak if you're either wanting to contribute or ask a question. So Samuel, you've been on mute, so please just go ahead.
Okay,
So
good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm so glad to be part of this conference today. It means a lot to me.
Thank you so much.
So as an animal production and health student, I've taken a course that has to do with fishes and aquaculture. And during my industrial training at my fourth year, I also had the opportunity to, I quote that a farm that relies on medications is it. So basically, in a situation where it's to check if the environment which the fishes are in are adequate and conducive. So,
Okay.
for example, in a situation where we have fishes that are more stocked, that are overstocked in their density, this case of stress is likely to occur. Then allowing the fish to go through hungry before feeding them can also cause the stress. So that's why we have to feed on time and at the right on time.
Okay, Samuel, it seems like your network is quite unstable.
Circumstance, so I can say about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So Dr. Alan will need to step out. Please, Dr. Alan, please just give us some quick final words, and then we're about to wrap up the meeting.
I don't think I have anything else to say except well done with all the organizing and getting this large group together on this Thursday. So thank you very much for all the hosting and the organizing. It was a great combination of talks as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Alan. So there were a number of questions about zoonosis, especially zoonosis combined with animal. So, okay, so Beth, I think Beth may need to. So Beth, please, if you do have any final words, please let's have your final words as well. Feel free to share.
I'll just echo Alan. Thank you. I don't have anything that hasn't already been said, but I really appreciate what you've brought together today. And it was a pleasure to join. So thank you very much to you and to all of the rest of the speakers and to everybody attending. It's been lovely.
Thank you so much. So before we round up right now, there were a number of questions about zoonosis, especially zoonosis as it relates to human-animal interactions. So quickly, I'd love to ask my mentor here, Dr. Elizabeth Omrod. She has had years of experience in that field, especially because she's a board member of the International Association for Human-Animal Interactions Organizations. So Liz would please love to ask the questions that did border around zoonosis. So I'll ask the two questions together. So the first says, in the face of zoonosis, how do clients manage pets kept for therapeutic roles at home? And then the other question says, can animal welfare curb the emergence of zoonosis? So Dr. Elizabeth Omrod.
Hi, thank you, Sunday. It's really important that people work with a veterinary surgeon who's experienced in the species that they want to involve in a animal-assisted intervention therapeutic context. And if delegates go to the website of the Society for Companion Animal Studies, they can download the SCAS conduct for AAI. That's free of charge. There's also the SAFE tool that's been developed through SCAS funding. That's available from our website. And that's about how to safely introduce various species into nursing homes and other care facilities. If you go to the IAHIO website, download the white paper and the guidelines for best practices. Those are free of charge as well. It's really important if you're setting up an animal-assisted intervention that you do it with a multidisciplinary approach. So there need to be veterinarians, animal behaviourists, and people from health and social care that specialise in the patient group that are going to be involved.
Okay, thank you so much for the response. And thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this conference.
Yeah, and sorry if I may just add.
Okay, yes.
In the case of pet animals, speaking regarding the question that is specific to pet animals, I think while it depends on where you are, if you're in Europe or North America, there is a possibility that there are some certifications that you need for a pet animal you'll be using for therapy. I'm sure those certifications will be based on vaccination records and diseases that the animals have had, the clinical record of the animal and treatments they have had in the past, and potentials of them shedding certain pathogens that are zoonotic. So, but if you're in the global south, well, I don't know of any country that has that kind of certification for pet animals that are used in therapy. So what you need to do, like Elizabeth Omrod said, is to work with the veterinarian and make sure specific diseases like rabies, listeriosis, leptospirosis have been vaccinated for in the pet animals you're going to be using. So also, if you're using an animal as a pet for therapy, don't just take any animal you see. Make sure you have the clinical record and you know they are clean of potential zoonotic infections before you adopt them for that purpose. So that is basically a way for you to reduce or eliminate the risk of getting a zoonotic infection from animals to use for therapy. And anybody that is using an animal for therapy should also be as observant as possible. So when you notice some changes in their behavior that could potentially be as a result of some health impairments, you reach out to your vet as soon as possible. And, you know, for preventive purposes, have them regularly checked by vets, a qualified veterinarian, so that you reduce or possibly even eliminate the risk of contracting some diseases from them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Doc, for that as well. At this point, we are about to wrap up the meeting. So one of our speakers is back in the building. So Evangelist, I don't know if you would have any last words.
Sunday, I did really enjoy that conference. Many interesting presentations, too many interesting questions that actually we don't have the time to answer during this the time that we have available. So I think that you should better start organizing next conference, and hopefully more of you know, our people who attended this meeting today will have the opportunity to ask more questions and learn more in this amazing area of animal behavior and welfare.
Okay, thank you so much. So thank you so much.
Sorry to interrupt again. And lastly, before we all go, I think the issue of animal welfare and use of animals in therapy is not really been talked about like other concepts like the One Health and so on and so forth, and zoonotic disease antimicrobial resistance. So it's really very important in this point in the history of humanity. There's a lot of things going on with people, depression and whatever, and use of animals in therapy can really help. So it is not a luxury at this point. It is gradually becoming a necessity for us to leverage on this potential of using animals to really augment the mental health of people, whether because of medical condition or just normal as a part of the social norm. So whenever you find yourself in gatherings and any chance you get to talk about animal welfareism and human-animal interaction, use of animals for therapy, please just bring it up. Get to understand what people perceive about it and how you can advocate for it better, so we can all drive the course forward and upwards. Thank you very much, everyone that attended. We really enjoyed your company, and from the retention level, we really believe that the participant had a lot to learn, and we hope to keep this up. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much, Doc, for those comments. Thank you so much, everyone who has been able to attend the meeting. Thank you for, we were literally blown up when we saw the way people registered for the conference from different parts of the world and everything. Thank you so much. Thank you to all, we say thank you to all our speakers and resource persons for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. Thank you, Nade from Barcelona. Thank you, I can't remember the name of the person who also joined from Iran. So thank you from different parts of the world for joining us today. There really can be no conference without you, the participants. So thank you so much. The resources will be made available to you. So the slides and the recording will be made available to you in the next few days. And we'll also work on getting receipts, the certificate, across to everyone in the next few days. Thank you all so much. And also to give a reminder that we have the Human-Animal Interactions Conference coming up in August. So we probably would send you a mail to that effect as well, so that you can register and attend that if it's something that would pique your interest. Thank you so much. With this, we have officially come to the end of the meeting. I will stop recording at this point.